Okay, so we're going to get started with the workshop portion of our evening, which will take us to 7:30. And we're lucky enough tonight for our workshop to have a memo, some early thoughts and recommendations by the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee. So we're going to just dive right into that, and with that, Natalie, perhaps you can kind of give us a bit of an overview, and then we'll get right to work.
Yeah, I can orient the group. So I think we did a presentation from the committee, kind of what the committee was looking at towards the beginning of the year. So the committee has been meeting since March of this year, of 2024. The committee was formed by the mayor. And so what this most recent kind of draft that's in front of you is, at the November 25th council meeting, JC, who is the chair of the committee, who will also come up to speak a little bit, JC and I gave a presentation to the city council on what the committee had been working on for the past few months and where they were. When we came out of that meeting, the council's request was, similar to kind of what they saw for the Main Street Action Committee. They asked if the Fishkill Committee maybe had some shorter term immediate actions that they could consider. So they asked JC and I to kind of go back to the committee and see if there was some priority items that had consensus of the committee members that we might want to put in front of the council for consideration. Again, the Fishkill Avenue Committee does not have any jurisdiction to make regulations or make zoning. We are just providing considerations and recommendations to the mayor and the council. So I think that's what this letter is. This is, and I can go through, I think with this body, there's two items in here that have to do with other kind of pedestrian infrastructure and litter and things like that within the corridor. But I think what we want to talk about with the planning board specifically is the zoning and land use recommendations, as you guys are kind of the expert with the zoning code. And this is where the committee's at. So I think we're looking for feedback on these items. If you have comments or things that you want the committee to consider. And then if you think like something's missing from this that either needs to maybe be one of the priority recommendations or maybe make it into our full report, we're open to that. And just so you know, the timeline here is this is a draft document that the committee has been workshopping. We want to have this conversation with the planning board and get initial feedback. The committee is meeting again January 8th, the second Wednesday of the month in January. We'll kind of, as a committee, review any comments we receive from the planning board tonight, talk about how we want to integrate those, and then eventually finalize this document, and this will get sent to the council for them to consider making potential changes to the zoning code.
So, quick question on that. You mentioned priority, right, which we'll be sort of talking about tonight. Mm-hmm. Is this a phased approach, or will ultimately come January, early next year, the full recommendations then be looked at by the council? Yeah,
I don't believe the committee will not have full recommendations by January.
I see. Okay.
Right. So. These are some things that that the committee had consensus on.
I see. Okay.
And so that's why they've kind of been pulled out as priority. I will just say there's a number of things that didn't make it into this draft memo that the committee is looking at, like access points to the future rail trail, appropriateness of ground floor residential uses, bike infrastructure, building heights and protection of public scenic view sheds. Those are things we're looking at. We just don't have items yet that we feel comfortable as a committee putting before the planning board or the council. So I think it was intended for there to be a final report, and then just with the request from the council, we've kind of prioritized some conversations.
Okay. And then I see JC here. How you doing? Just wanted to say thanks for volunteering and for all of your time, as well as to the rest of the committee, if there are other committee members here.
If we can invite JC up to the podium.
Yeah, come on up.
While we go through these and have the conversation.
Please do.
And actually, before we start with like the substance of the discussion, I just want to follow up on Natalie's summary just with, some legal guide rails, the boring stuff.
Wouldn't be a meeting without that. Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
So I just want to remind both the planning board and the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee. I always want to say Fishkill Avenue Creek Committee. Concepts Committee, we're not here to talk about specific applications.
Thank you.
Right? We're here to talk about just general concepts. It would not be appropriate to have conversations or examples about specific applications. We can certainly have that general discussion without those references. And it's, more tthan appropriate, the Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee. is-
Fishkill Avenue Creek concept.
We can just say the committee, the
The
Fishkill Avenue
committee.
Committee, yeah. I'll take out a C.
is doing a good job by doing their due diligence to, solicit feedback and recommendations from other boards and committees of the city, so including the planning board. So I think this is an important step in the committee's work, and I think this will be a good discussion.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so jumping in, so going down to the zoning and land use section. So the committee's been doing a lot to kind of evaluate the corridor, from doing everything from kind of walkthroughs along the corridor. We did a lot of public engagement back in the summer where we had kind of pop-up tablings at the tracks on Fishkill Avenue during weekdays to capture employees to the corridor, during weekends to capture residents and visitors, as well as talking to property owners along the corridor, folks who have approved projects, as well as like potential projects. So we've been doing a lot of due diligence, and these are some of the things that kind of, I think, rose to the top. So one use that's currently permitted in a few of the corridor, or a few of the zoning districts along the corridor is self-storage. And so why the committee is focused on self-storage is, although there is a need for these facilities, right, as dictated by them kind of being prevalent in a number of communities, and in fact, there is one self-storage in a reused former brick factory building in this corridor. Due to low numbers of kind of employment at these facilities traditionally, as well as their lack of contribution to kind of pedestrian activity and active storefronts, the committee is making a recommendation to the council that the council look at this use and consider either making it a special permit use with additional kind of restrictions on it, or potentially prohibiting it from some of the districts. And so, I did a disservice by I jumped over a little bit at the beginning where the committee's kind of talking about the vision for the corridor. And I think it is, it's not a Main Street corridor, but it is definitely, I think what the committee is looking at is opportunities for this to be more of a mixed-use commercial corridor that definitely has a improved pedestrian environment that it currently has, so that it is not just seen as a place you drive through, but rather that a place that you potentially come to either by bike or car, park, and get out and walk around. And so that's why when we're talking about vibrancy of storefronts and things like that, that's where that comes into play. So that's one of the recommendations. The other one, the committee has similar concerns regarding fast food and quick service uses because of the focus on the auto-centric design and some concerns around pedestrian safety created by additional traffic or turning vehicles, or an increased number of vehicles kind of entering and exiting a site within business operations. So for similar reasons, the committee is recommending that the council consider making these special permit uses. Right now, drive-throughs are not really expressly kind of defined in the code, as neither are fast food. So there is a little bit of I think there's a little bit of vagueness there within the code in terms of defined terms. So I think that's a recommendation to kind of define those, and then consider applying, again, special permit and stringent design regulations to those things to think about pedestrian safety and or consider prohibiting them. And then that also applies to some, and then we can stop there for a second because I think that's some key things. That also applies to some other auto-oriented uses, gas stations, car washes, auto repair facilities. And again, because of their car-centric focus, the auto-centric focus, thinking about adding design regulations or prohibiting those. JC, did you have anything to add? I would think we could do the use, stop there, and then we can go into some of the other recommendations. Okay. So I don't know if the board has comments.
That was a good summary, yeah. So again, those are our zoning land use recommendations. We've been studying other things, but we're not necessarily zoning per se. But yeah, that was basically the summary. We noted in a recommendation 7, just our continued support for connections to the future rail trail. But that, and so we've been discussing ideas of easements and so forth, things like that.
I guess I might as well jump in and just say the one other recommendation that's currently made it into this priority, because it's the one that's left out, is requiring that parking be set back behind the front facade of the building. So either behind a building, to the side of the building, and if it is to the side, then having either like a low wall or landscaping to kind of shield that. And along with that, potentially reducing the setback. Right now, you have a minimum setback within the GB district of 15 feet. So potentially reducing that minimum to something like 10 feet so that you would, or less, so that you kind of get buildings and landscaping set up more towards the street rather than kind of set back behind parking. And again, that again starts to address some of these concerns of what it feels like as a pedestrian to walk along this corridor and not feeling like you're surrounded by kind of vacant space, but instead there's buildings with folks inside them, either at the business or residential, that are activating the pedestrian space.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add, as part of our research and due diligence for the history, we looked at John Clark's recommendations from a year ago, and that was also one of his recommendations, to move the setback from 15 to 10 feet in this area.
Yeah, I think that, personally, I think, you sort of started with the kind of vision, the idea that this is, although it is, a pretty well-traveled by cars corridor, that there definitely should be, and could quite easily be, much more of a focus on activating the pedestrian experience. And I think the relationship of building and ground floor use to, the sidewalk, a planting strip, the pedestrian experience is a really great way to start to look at that vision for the corridor. I'm curious, though, too, when you think of activation, it's not just businesses necessarily, it's also potentially residential. And we're residential adjacent as well. Is there thinking around mixed use for, a lot of the mixed commercial residential for a lot of the parcels?
Yeah, I mean, at least in the GB, like residential is permitted. I think one of the things the council's considering right now, but hasn't come to really, we still have more research we want to do on it, is whether or not residential uses should be permitted on the ground floor. Because of that activation, they are not often, you wouldn't, typically, if you're trying to do a commercial corridor or a pedestrian corridor, often you will see municipalities that do not permit residential uses on the ground floor because they're less active than. However, the committee is discussing, because this isn't necessarily a Main Street corridor, and we do have a housing crisis. And often demanding that developers do ground floor commercial, disincentivize investment, because it's not financially feasible in all climates, right? That's a risk, or that's a carrying cost the developers have to carry if they can't fill that commercial space. So we're still kind of talking around those ideas of, could you require residential amenity space on the ground floor, like lobbies, communal space, gyms, things like that, and would that be enough to activate the ground floor while still permitting the majority of the building to be residential?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think all of that, what you just described, and by asking about it, I wasn't necessarily advocating for a ground floor residential, but residential supporting type functions like what you described makes a lot of sense.
We've been studying the proposal that was on Conklin that was approved, and it hasn't been built, and so we've been talking to that owner as well as other developers and understanding their perspective. And while this is not an attempt to, we've generally agreed not an attempt to replicate Main Street, we still are, obviously considering things that would share with Main Street, like pedestrian experience on both sides of the streets. So that is not there now, and I think there is consensus that a pedestrian experience on both sides of the street is something that we think would be important to have as a goal, so that even if there is residential on the first floor, or if there is experiences not like Main Street, pedestrian experience on both sides of the street is important,
Yeah, yeah.
like a sidewalk.
Yeah, I personally haven't read the full scope of the memo just yet, but I'm just curious about, this idea of potential traffic calming elements. Has the committee at this point thought about those types of things, and do they make their way into some of these recommendations?
Yeah, they're not in, there is one recommendation at the top of this that is about a crossing that we just heard over and above from the public when we did our public engagement this past summer, about a crossing in front of Mill Street.
Yeah.
And improving that, there is one there, but whether people actually slow down or stop for it. So that made it in there, and then I think largely outside of that on the committee, we're looking at kind of street improvements, complete street improvements, such as potentially on-street parking, landscaping, potentially bike facilities, sidewalks on both sides, all of those things that narrow the driver's experience,
Yeah.
which has been shown to be the number one way to make drivers slow down,
Yeah.
right? You can post whatever you want on a sign in terms of what the speed limit is, but drivers will drive as fast as they feel comfortable driving, and that often has to do with the width of the road.
Yeah,
So
calming
bringing
effects,
buildings
yeah.
up, thinking about on-street parking, things like that, the committee's definitely been talking about that as traffic calming for the corridor.
Yeah, and when you think about that, it obviously plays into this idea of, this sort of pedestrian-related experience, the ability to cross easily and comfortably, slower traffic, yeah, so
Yeah,
it all plays in.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we learned, go ahead, you had a question?
Sorry, just to what Natalie had just said. I remember reading, and I'm putting this as a question, because I just remember reading this somewhere, that there was a similar effect with traffic slowing just with having narrower lanes, even in the context of a wider gauge.
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, the narrow of the lane,
Yeah.
whether that's painted lines or whether you actually have physical kind of barriers such as parked vehicles, narrowing the lane can also help to have folks drive slower. So, you'll see wider lanes on highways where you want speeds to be higher because folks feel more comfortable there. So narrowing the lanes can definitely help, but I think also that the more vertical narrowing of the vision helps a lot as well.
You'll usually see that in construction sites where Jersey barriers are put up along the lanes. Lane is still the same width, but because of that obstacle being there, people greatly reduce their speeds.
One of the things, David, we noticed in the WSP plans that were drawn for the work being done right now in Fishkill Avenue is that the engineers showed a 10-foot-10 lane. And right now on Fishkill, predominantly, it's between 11-foot-6 and 12-foot lanes, typically around 11.9. So it's about a foot thinner proposed in those drawings for the lanes. And that was, we were told, in an effort to calm the traffic.
Nice, okay. So just as far as your kind of a quick summary of the committee's major recommendations at the moment. You had summarized some of them, looking at, this idea of self-storage as a use. The idea is that the recommendation would be, by the committee to the council, would be to limit or somehow make that use a special use.
Yeah, and so that goes for a few of the different uses that are in there, right, that are more auto-centric.
Right, like you mentioned, auto wash and
Yeah, I
gas
have
station.
a question about that, and that is just if auto repair and auto body work becomes prohibited or special permit use, where would we accommodate those things? Because there's not, that's a big, that corridor has a lot of industrial zoning. There's a little bit of industrial down by the train station, but it's a very small area. I can think of 3 auto repair shops that are in the R15 district around Main Street, like on Verplank, on Chestnut. I don't know if those are existing non-conforming uses where if they stop, then they're out of there. And so I don't know how far the zone along Fishkill Avenue that this corridor is would consider prohibiting them, but I'm just thinking for a second, where would we accommodate those uses in the city if we prohibit them here?
It's a fair, I mean, it's a fair point, and it's the same thing the committee's thinking about with industrial uses, right? This corridor has a lot of larger kind of industrial uses, and if they are prohibited from here, where else are they permitted?
They're going to go nowhere.
In the city, and it's, I think that's a trade-off that a lot of communities are facing right now of allowing for these businesses that provide services for residents both in this city as well as neighboring cities versus the effect that they have on the walkability of a corridor or the desirability for residential uses on a corridor and things like that. So it's...
But there's also tax-based considerations too, right, for eliminating industrial properties?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would argue that a mixed-use building with residential and ground floor commercial is going to give you much more ratables than industrial use, but not always. It depends on how your assessor is looking at each of those buildings. But yeah, that has been discussed by the committee as well. So it's a point that we've been looking at and considering, and I think something that would have to be discussed further with the council and whether they decide to move forward with that recommendation. I think the committee's making a recommendation based on the pedestrian experience in this corridor and what has been left out of this corridor. But there's definitely aspects like that to weigh against it. So I think it's a good point I can take back to the group.
Thanks.
Just to remind everyone, the corridor that we've been looking at is essentially from Ron's to Prospect, which is where Fishkill, and in that strip, it overlaps about 4 different zoning districts. So we're not necessarily, these prohibitions wouldn't necessarily apply to all of them, right? So HI or the other industrial districts wouldn't necessarily, we're not necessarily saying that, at least at this point. I think we're just referring to the GB district, right, for the car.
That's a hard,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good point. The committee hasn't made a decision about whether we are going to be proposing tweaks to the existing zoning districts or doing one new zoning district and what parcels. So it's kind of hard, and I think right now some of the recommendations are made specifically for GB, somewhere
GB,
along the
yeah.
corridor.
So we're trying to be sensitive to the fact that, there will still be a variety of experience, of zoning opportunities. But again, we're still reviewing these things. Nothing has been finalized in our mind.
No. Thanks. So what the timeline again, you're taking these recommendations, these early priorities to the council when?
We wanted to
Not
follow
sure.
up with feedback from the planning board tonight, initial feedback. The Fishkill committee meets again on January 8th,
January,
and that's where
okay.
we would potentially finalize a memo to then be forwarded to the council. So it won't be until January.
Okay.
So if the board wants to take more time and look it over and then send recommendations to the committee. And again,
Yeah.
it's this letter, and then there's the much longer extent of the full report, which I think we're obviously still trying to get done in the first half of next year, but it won't be
It's in
done
our
by
email.
January.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think, I don't know, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I think it would behoove us to take a little bit more time before we share our thoughts as a board back on these initial recommendations. I'm curious, JC, just from the standpoint of the committee, are there any elements of your series of early recommendations now that you want to highlight for us for any specific feedback, or you're just looking for feedback in general? I'm just curious if there's anything on your mind that you could specifically use our help with, or would like specific feedback on. Just curious.
I think the committee and myself personally, we're interested in what happens in the public corridor, maybe more so than what happens in the private lots, even though that's a part of that zoning affects the private lots. But we feel that the public corridor is obviously a continuous area that will hopefully be influenced positively by our recommendations. So any development that encroaches into the public corridor could, challenge the proliferation of any kind of recommendations we have.
So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that some of these early recommendations are doing just that. They're sort of setting the framework around that, the public element, the public aspect of the corridor. Makes a lot of sense. So, okay. So I think we'll figure out timing on how we as a board come together to sort of memorialize our thoughts and recommendations. Any, around the board, we still have a few minutes, any early thoughts to start to help form that?
I mean, the only thing I'd echo is what Lynn said with regard to some of these uses. People have cars they want to wash and get repaired. I don't know that saying drive to Fishkill is a good developmental approach.
I'm hoping that this turns into a full proposal at some point that involves uses, bulk, parking, the way that the streetscape works, design considerations, right? And that, I have to tell you, there's there are a lot of vacant buildings there that are probably going to get rented out in a short amount of time. And we're going to be asked to make determinations about how they get used. It's not going to be renovating and renting out the existing buildings, as has done, or is like the third application is in front of us, isn't going to change the fabric of a car-oriented place extensively, right? We're going to have new sidewalks and some other things. But there's an opportunity to come to a consensus and try to build a community consensus around improvements, ways that the community would prefer that to happen. And I'm hoping that that consensus can be built and that it's ambitious and that it would, those things don't happen quickly. They take a long time. Over time, if you have a plan and everybody slots into it, you can make a significant change to the environment. So I hope that's what happens.
Yeah, other than my concern about some uses being completely prohibited, I'm very much in favor of the complete streets and bike lanes. I used to go to get my car repaired at Freedom before, throw my bicycle in the trunk, drop it off, bicycle back. You know, having the amenities of bike lanes, I'm very much in favor of that.
Yeah, I too feel like the pedestrian and bike friendliness is very important. And I feel like the mix of uses, like you mentioned, we have, auto repair and car wash, like there's the car wash on Main Street, and it feels like I personally like the mix, and I feel like if there were, a smaller scale, it still feels very residential, it still feels very safe to bike and to walk, past these, and it's convenient. I'm happy to have auto repair places that I can drop my car off and walk home to from. So
maybe more like focus on the design, on the form and the design, rather than prohibition.
And maybe
of
if there's,
uses.
right, and maybe, it's kind of a density issue also of those business, like, we don't need, like 5, it seems to me like it's the mix that's important. And, right now, the use is very uniform along the corridor in general, and the more mixed it gets, I feel like the better off we'll be. But I think that, the uses of, the car kind of centric repair, cleaning, washing, whatever, it's a fact of life, and we need to design it appropriately so that it's user-friendly and doesn't detract from the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I agree. I think that, we're not trying to replicate Main Street, right? And that this corridor should provide that variety. And so therefore, I think consideration for auto-related businesses shouldn't be totally thrown out. I think, all of it comes down to just exactly what you're talking about. To some degree, it's that sort of framework of the corridor itself, the infrastructure, the traffic calming, the pedestrian experience, but also traffic safety, right, in context of some of these types of uses. And I think as well, industrial does have a place, and if it has a place anywhere, it's along this corridor. So, yeah, I think the general sense is that the planning board would be in support of not outright banning. And I can't believe I'm hearing myself say this, but even to some degree, drive-throughs and fast food.
I think it's good for us to have to get out of our cars every once in a while.
To some degree, what?
Fast food. Yeah, like I say, we're not going to try and replicate Main Street. I think if there is, an area of Beacon where that could be considered appropriate, it's this part of that corridor. So, yeah, I think your point, Karen, the idea of variety and variety of service is a really good way to look at this area.
Yeah.
But again, all within that framework of, traffic calming, safety,
Yeah.
traffic safety. Because I know there've been a number of accidents over the years along that corridor because elements of it aren't safe right now. So that's hugely important.
Yeah, I
And
think
so,
there's
yeah.
also, a need within the business community. I've heard feedback from, whether it's workshop space or, a construction company that needs a garage and yard storage space. It's fewer and fewer areas that are supportive of those types of uses in town.
And that's one of the reasons why I asked about mixed use and residential, because there is potentially a compatibility thing that would really need to be considered and thought through when you think about adding residential, which I think is a need, what that looks like, what it looks like in context of some of these other varied and mixed use types. So I know that's somewhat probably down the road, right, for you guys.
Like
for the-
performance standard, yeah, absolutely.
Well, then design, don't get me started, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
That'll be a
I
whole
mean, I
separate-
think that's
another
very important.
thing.
But I feel like there's already some clusters of residential use, like either just adjacent to the corridor so it's scattered, and I feel like, looking at how to connect it.
I think that, and that's a really good point. That was going to be sort of my last, even, thinking about context and design, not just aesthetic, but how some of those residential streets outlet onto 52, and what that experience in and of itself is, right? And how it relates to, what you're, as a resident, greeted with when you make your way. Is it, an auto repair shop garage bay, right, open right in front of you when you're making your way out onto 52. Those are also design elements that I don't know how we would end up, getting to the point where we're able to be that specific. But, when we think about looking at design holistically and planning holistically, that is an element that makes for good design.
Yeah,
So.
all really helpful. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for all of your work. I know I've done committee work. I know it's not easy. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Anything you'd like to add? No, you just said it. Yeah, great. Great. You too. Thank you, Mayor. All right, with that, welcome everybody to our December 2024 meeting of the City of Beacon Planning Board. First item of business is and I think we have the ability to do this, because believe it or not, in times past, we haven't, but approval of our last month, November minutes. I think we have a quorum for that. And I don't believe there have been any adds or additions. Anything else, board, to add or modify? Karen had one? Of course. Love it. So that's been updated. So the minutes have been updated to reflect Karen's input. I'll have a motion to approve into the record those modified minutes.
Motion.
Motion by Len,
Second.
second by Karen, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So then we'll go to the first item on the agenda. That is the continued review of an application for site plan and subdivision approval, mixed-use commercial and residential, 45 Beekman Street, High Street and High Street, submitted by Beekman Arts Center and Bay Ridge Studios. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant. Tonight, as the chairman mentioned, I'm here before you in connection with our continued review of the application for subdivision and site plan approval proposing to redevelop the property for two 4-story mixed-use multifamily residential buildings located at 45 Beekman and High Street. Tonight, I'm joined by our architect, R.A. Siegel, and our project engineer, Justin Dates, as well as Rich D'Andrea of Colliers. By way of brief update, as the board is aware, at your September meeting, the planning board referred the application originally to the ARB subcommittee for its review. We've had a couple subsequent meetings that I'll go through, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues to walk you through some of the changes. REA originally met with the committee back in October, at which time the committee provided some preliminary feedback to your board, and then we worked to design and incorporate some of that into our project design and the surrounding developments to sort of work those elements into it in the urban landscape. REA then revised the plan to reflect those committee updates, among other things, the arcade walkway, work on the fenestration, the corner tower, and various facade components. So that was sort of the initial workout through that process. Since then, REA met with the ARB again in November. We did, of course, appear before you then to discuss some of those revisions. So in that sort of update, we did revise the floor plans to include High Street level, as well as a new tower design, and the corner was chamfered. That's like when I had to learn fenestration and kick plates, all that architect speak, to eliminate previous columns. So then REA, in his regular meetings with the ARB subcommittee, met with the committee last Friday, and thank you, I believe Natalie had to probably step out of our conference to jump onto that call, at which time he reviewed some additional renderings with the board, and REA is, of course, going to present those to you all this evening. Of course, you haven't had the benefit of some of those additional changes. We did make a formal submission to you for the regular application, but of course that ARB subcommittee meeting was post, so we do appreciate the opportunity to show you some of those changes, but we're just really trying to dial down this design. So with that, just to give you a quick snapshot of our most recent submission, what we changed in conjunction with the building design and the hardscape revisions. We had some additional pedestrian access that will be provided, and Justin can kind of touch on some of those landscape elements as they sort of work to incorporate the items in the city planner's comments, as well as those from the board, of course, as we go through. Some of those brief updates, we did include 2 sidewalk connections to the main building entrance at the corner to provide convenience from the Beekman Street sidewalk, as well as pedestrian plaza at the Route 9D Beekman Street intersection with an accessible ramp and sculpture display concept. Additional street trees and green space was put on to incorporate some of those comments, including more mature trees. Karen's mentioned at the last meeting. There are certain utilities that we mentioned, so there is certain areas within the transition zone that probably shouldn't do some of that within, so we did try to pull some of those away from the curb line for where we could have more or additional trees that might be more accepting of that. We did, on the plans, depict the removal of a section of sidewalk adjacent to the Beekman Street building. That gives some more green space, and again, allows for those larger canopy trees, because I think that was a consideration at the last meeting. Rich will discuss shortly that we also updated some of the site plan sheets to include 3 additional parking spaces. I think Mr. Worsted is on via the Zoom, so he can certainly give some additional feedback there. I think we had already established a zoning compliance, of course, as you all recall. We will ultimately need a variance for a very peculiar setback in relation to where we are. And I'm wondering if, when the property is conveyed by the DOT, whether we'll need it. But in any event, we added some additional parking. So we have 3 new spaces on the plan to be ultra-conservative from prior analysis. With that, Rich will also touch on recent meeting with the DOT. I think the board is aware, but I believe Mr. Russo and Mr. Worsted were both on that call as well, so they can certainly weigh in on that. But we are nearing, ever so close, to a final determination by DOT, or hopefully conveyance, of that property. You know, I've been telling Rich, I really, you know, it's all I want for Christmas is a new right-of-way. But for now, I'll turn it over to REA just to give you some updates on the actual plan. We'll turn to Justin and Rich.
Good evening. So, yeah, as Taylor mentioned, we had our third meeting with the ARB on Friday, and so the renderings you're going to see is what we reviewed at that meeting. I'm going to be updating those based on the comments that we talked about on Friday. But we did adjust several details since the previous meeting. But the main change was that corner tower. It was sort of square to the corner before. Now it's chamfered, so you walk directly into it. We lost that column that was sort of interfering with the pedestrian access there. And then, just so the way that the tower relates to the corner has changed. And we're still kind of working through how that plaza would be integrated with that. And, but I think the committee was, generally in favor of that move and making that change and that interconnection with the plaza. And then we also looked, because we looked at the tower design, we also looked at the tower design of the High Street building, changed that somewhat. So we did go through, several specific recommendations from the board, and those will be incorporated into the, into the next submission. I'll just go through some of the renderings that we just got. That's looking back up from the High Street building up to the corner.
So again, Aria, nothing here you're showing us is new since your Friday meeting?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this is what we...
That's what you all reviewed?
Right.
Yep.
And yeah, so what happens next is coming off
We'll
of
be new
this.
to the other members of the board, and I know we haven't gotten the notes from that ARB committee meeting approved and circulated yet, but those will come soon, so you can see the conversation.
Yeah, so, and we do obviously have ARB members here, and at a certain point, when you're done, Aria, I just want to maybe go through some of the summary of those members' observations of the activity of the ARB.
Yeah, no, that'd be good, just to line it up.
Yep.
Yeah, we didn't get the notes yet, so we'll...
No, I sent them out today for people to look them over.
Yeah, and I took notes during the thing too, so hopefully those will all line up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some more images from that. Nighttime view. And then that's just a view of that little area between the buildings as that's getting developed. But yeah, so there was just details or recommendations on how to reinforce some of the details and sort of integrate it with some of the new work and
Sorry, Aria, what view is this? This is down Beekman between the buildings?
Yeah.
How do you get that rise between the buildings? Is that build-up landscape? Is the natural topography?
I need to confirm a little bit and see if that's actually what's...
Looks like there's a hill there.
Yeah.
Where there wasn't
I don't
one.
think it's that hilly that close.
Okay.
It rises as you move back on the site, but I think that's a little too close. Unless you want a hill.
In which case it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, I'll settle for a realistic representation of what we're going to ultimately see when built.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
That's what we're working on.
I recall you bringing people to task for notional trees and whatnot.
Things that ultimately don't get built, but look nice in a rendering.
Yeah.
Kids holding balloons is fun.
Yeah. So basically, once I get the notes and confirm that what I'm thinking is included in those notes, then we're going to, go through some of the additional details that we talked about and submit the renderings again. I'm just wondering what the recommendation would be at this stage. Do we do ARB again or start coming back to the board?
Let's hear from ARB members.
Yeah, okay.
And also the non-ARB board members that,
Yeah.
well,
No,
I'll say non-subcommittee members.
Right.
Who, we're all the architectural review board when we're together. So yeah, I want to hear from the subcommittee and then other non-subcommittee board members tonight. And then we'll make a determination on whether another ARB is necessary.
Okay.
So.
So, yeah, I mean, that's my summary. I don't know if you want to do the ARB members.
Yeah,
Now
let's
or-
touch on, and our subcommittee members are Kevin, Len, and Karen. Yeah, so who wants to start?
Sure.
Good.
So, one of the things we talked about was that there are sort of three tower structures on the two buildings. And one is the clock tower at the corner of Beekman and 9D, which is, right now, it's in two different materials. The wing walls are in brick, and the main is that metal clad. We talked about whether it might be better to have a consistent material on the tower.
Yep.
And maybe it's, I'm speaking for myself here, but maybe it's the metal clad entirely, because it would create a contrast to the tower on the High Street building, which is right now entirely in brick, I think, except for the prism on top of it. I don't know if you can pull it up while we're chatting, RA. But on the tower on the High Street building, it's got three piers that project up beyond the third floor. And compared to the clock tower, which is kind of slender, the tower on the High Street building seems a little blocky, and the piers looked a little bit tall and maybe not as graceful as they could be. So we talked about reducing the height, maybe looking at some different materials. And then there's actually almost a third tower on the west corner, the southwest corner of the building that we're looking at right now. And we had a question of, can there be like a variations on a theme kind of approach where, each one is a little bit different. The one on the High Street building's got a prism on it, the other one's got the clock face. The third one doesn't have a feature on top of it and doesn't necessarily need to, but maybe between the brickwork and, there can be kind of a thematic relationship between those elements. Karen called them, maybe sisters, which is kind of a cool way to look at them.
Instead of twins.
Sisters, not twins, yeah.
And then we were looking at the building on the corner of Beekman and 9D. There was a question about, if we can get the daylight version, there's a question about the height of the brick that's between the top of the second floor and the bottom of the third floor windows compared to the height of those metal spandrel panels in the bays that are metal clad between the top of the second and the bottom of the third floor windows. And I was just saying that, maybe the spandrel panels are kind of wide, a little bit chunky, and that maybe if the thickness of that band was reduced to the height of the brick band between the windows and those brick bays, that it might give a little bit more lightness. You're not going to be able to see it from here, but the way the renderings were set up, there's a metal casing or molding around the first story rectangular openings that access onto the arcade. And in the renderings, it's pretty thick, and it reduces the amount of brick that you see in the center of those pillars to like almost just like one or two bricks wide. And so there was a comment about maybe you want to... So the vertical columns on the arcade, there's a very thick metal casing or molding around the openings. And the way it was shown in the rendering, it pretty much diminished the visible brick at the center of each column.
Down at the first floor.
Down to nothing.
Yeah.
Can you show a zoomed-in view of the arcade or the corner?
Yeah,
There was something we saw.
it kind of starts
And
thinking,
there's just some, and there's
distorted,
a couple
but-
of artifacts in the rendering.
yeah.
Right, which were distracting, right?
Yeah, well, it's just like, I don't know if I can,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
right, the thinness of the brick on and the columns of the
Yeah.
arcade.
Yeah, we're just talking
Because of
about,
the thickness of the metal.
thinning that up.
Right.
Yeah, and then, the last thing we were talking about, and this is getting a little bit nitty-gritty, but on the brick clad facade to the right of the clock tower, on the very left-hand side of it, on the vertical, I don't know if you want to call it a pilaster or whatever, there's a corbel between the third and second floors.
Yeah,
On the other side, there's not.
Yep.
It goes all the way down. And so I was just saying, you're going to have a different plane of brick on either side of that arcade opening if one side is corbelled and the other side isn't.
yep.
Which I don't know if that's kind of weirdly distracting or
Detail
not.
all down the brick, right? That there's some detail that shows up somewhere. and
So,
we talked about.
Karen, you were saying that it would be nice to fix some of that stuff. And I think in the rendering too, there's a little bit of an MC Escher thing going on the left side of the clock tower that's just a rendering artifact. But Karen, I think you pointed out that it would be nice to get maybe a little more brick detail on the south-facing, the Beekman facing side of the building, on the brick elements to sort of match the detail that we're seeing on the 9D facing side.
Yeah, they looked, at least in the rendering, that it was a pretty, one face and without.
Yeah, so we
and
were
like
talking about getting some.
Some
layer
shadow
layering.
lines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am in agreement. I would be in support, because I like the refinement that articulation of that brick corbelling adds in the larger, more prominent two-bay brick element. So if we could repeat that, it does. It just sort of adds, that kind of level of a little more sophistication to the brick. Instead of these, flat brick surfaces and a punch right through with windows, there's just a little bit of thoughtfulness.
Across.
I also, I like that thought about possibly getting the third, tower, the other end. At one point, we had talked about keeping all that at one height, because I had some height variation there. And then we went to, keeping all that brick at
Are you
one
saying
height.
raise the height on the,
We'll do something here to articulate it a little bit.
It doesn't have to be height.
I don't
It could
so.
just
No.
be, we weren't, I think we specifically kind of avoided asking
Yeah.
for that. But, on the brick detail, across Route 9D, there's a couple of brick buildings. One has that mother gallery in it, the other one I think is a salon. And the salon building has some neat first floor pilasters that have a little detail at the top of them. And so picking up kind of cool brick details is a nice kind of, overall vibe with some of the existing structures in the vicinity. And Kevin, you talked a little bit, we were talking a little bit about the way the window casings are set up, that they kind of punch through the brick face.
Right.
And you were talking about,
Yeah, just, I'll say one thing in general. I mean, basically, the setup that you have, we can make work, right? The brick with the metal, the whole partie, right? We've managed to, figure out that, in general, you can make this work, right? There's a lot of choices that are made, and this is sort of your thing. You've done this other ways with the brick, facade, and at this point, we're talking about how to make it pull together, right? Which is the toughest part of, and why, really good fashion designers are really rare and they're appreciated, and there are others. So the difference between a building that is really expressive or doesn't sort of turn you off when you look at it, and a really fine building is all about proportions, details, and all those fine things. So we did start to have an opportunity to talk about some of the things like which the way the windows are framed, the proportions of the windows, the fact that there's Len was discussing the spandrel area, the black area, right, and how that gets articulated differently than the brick, right? And because, and there are some of the things that I would I don't feel are resolved, but I think we talked it through and there's an opportunity to fix it. The tower's the toughest thing to do, right? Because you're actually putting yourself out there. You're saying, "This is a clock tower, look at me," right? So it's a very expressive part of the building. And when you miss on an expressive thing like that, it's like wearing the wrong hat, right? It's like, it really stands out. So that's something that is going to require, I think, the extra effort and thought and time to get it to work like the other tower I felt worked, the one in the smaller building, right? Because it was sort of subdued and it was internally coherent, right? All the details were sort of similar to each other, right? And we don't have a view of it, but and it also seemed familiar, like you'd seen construction like that, even though it was not exactly like anything, right? The top of this clock tower and also the brick side parts are the parts that are like, it's a little weird, you know? And also I thought the framing and some of the proportions, but I think that what's going to make the difference at this point is the detailing, the proportion, the color selection, and all those that we're not there yet, right? And I think there's the opportunity. I think you have to be there. You have to get it done because it's, as you said, it's an important building. It's going to be a landmark in Beacon.
There's talk about looking at the color on the metal bays, maybe like a gray-green or something, just to see what the
Yeah,
what the
just to
impact
see
would be.
how it relates to the brick color, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's easy. I could do a little selection just to give you an idea.
And the one other item I think that I have, just looking at the draft notes real quick too, is talked about signage for the ground floor commercial uses and how that would maybe be integrated into the arcade design there, just because obviously like that activation and visibility that we talked a little bit about in terms of our training session at the beginning, looking at how you could carry that through with an arcade here that's kind of setting commercial uses back a little bit, but you can still definitely draw attention to them and advertise them in a way.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add? Subcommittee member Keenan?
I think all of the points, I think,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else to add. The one other thing that we did talk about was the fourth floor, the windows on the fourth floor setback and how they were like much kind of more refined and cleaner than the metal, the window, in the metal portion of the main building, and that maybe, they should start to speak a little bit more of the same language.
Yeah, and I think that I started looking at that, and I think that that's going to start to happen once I reduce that area between the two floors on the main building.
Yeah, and we spoke also about, under, like, REA chose a lighter color to lighten the top of the building, but we talked about like a little bit more cohesion in the color, so that it doesn't feel like such a separate.
Meaning the top,
Yeah,
yeah.
Like a lighter variation of the color. as
Yeah,
opposed
like-
to-
Yeah, I mean, I think that element, you actually might get an actual view from this distance. And so, as it reads, I personally think it should read as a more lighter ethereal element up there.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like all of these, all of this feedback is headed in the right direction, and I think even the evolution that you're showing here tonight is as well. Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think the mix of materials on the tower itself is distracting. It's just a little odd, so I'm in support of definitely looking at that. Yeah, and it's positioning, the clock tower. It feels more natural. I think, again, its relationship to its surrounding elements, as I think either Len or Kevin just pointed out, it's going to be really important because that balance is going to be felt. So, but as a kind of a focal element, it's headed in the right direction. I think just overall the composition is not as visually cluttered as it has been up until now. So that's a really nice evolution. And that, you know, these sort of hierarchical relationships are starting to make sense, right? You know, even what had really sort of irked me in the past was the heaviness of the metal kind of infill piece. The fact that you're starting to kind of modulate it a little bit and you're getting some shadow with those elements that protrude and some variation there. I'm just curious, do they protrude deeper than the brick elements flanking? Meaning, do they come out further?
Oh, then those faces of
Yeah,
the
those
brick?
two faces in the middle of the gray element.
It's very close, but they may pop out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
it's those kinds of things,
Right.
that those relationships that make a difference ultimately. Because to some degree, my mind reads that the brick is somehow more prominent forward than the black. The black recedes a little bit. But then if, you know, physically, that's a different story. From different angles, it's going to be read differently, and it might feel uncomfortable. So, you know, that's something to consider. I think, yes, refinement and articulation on the brick elements is really important. And two, I notice if you zoom in again on the ground plane, the idea that you're creating this sort of brick shoe element or knee wall. I'm curious why those are punches rather than, you know, where the vertical feels more like a pier, right? And the storefront actually comes all the way down to the ground. I think it would give more of a sort of, in that, you know, for that reason, maybe those piers should read more heavy.
I'd have to agree, because I feel like the framing, the black, it looks like storefront, you know, like 6x6 storefront. It feels a little, not fancy or something. It seems unsophisticated. I feel awkward about it.
Well,
Yeah,
it
I
just-
didn't-
just-
yeah, I think it's a scale thing.
Yeah.
First, I was looking at articulating it with a little bit more levels of stuff, but then that was getting a little too much. But what I was trying to do is just get some proportion that looked like it was actually, you know, supporting, as opposed to an arch. You know, that
Yeah.
frame is sort of supporting, but I don't think it's quite there.
Yeah, I mean, technically, it's called a flat arch, you know that.
Yeah.
But, you know, the way I read that heavy metal element is that it has this, you know, brick base that's being supported by,
Right.
you know, columns, and the columns are disappearing,
Right.
right?
Yeah. No,
And they're
that'll.
disappearing because
yeah.
they're being encroached upon, as Kevin described, by
Right.
the frame, but also because you've got that brick infill at the bottom. And that it would feel a little more strong if somehow the pier element was
Right.
more articulated.
Oh, okay.
Remember the windows from the rug house, the rug building? And I forget the name of the project.
Warp and
Well,
weft, warp and weft.
Warp and Weft.
Yeah,
Thank
you told me to refer to other buildings in Beacon, so
Oh,
I referred to my own.
Self-referential.
You're creating the same as or different, you know, your own context. that
It's
you're
all
responding to.
derivative.
Play your cards right, REA, and there's a coffee table book in it for you. But if not, it's either that or infamy.
One other.
Monograph.
One other point of discussion was, you know, at the top of what is now the clock tower, perhaps that there are other, you know, other than a clock, there are other ways to, you know, highlight that corner of the building, such as art.
Oh, right. That was, what we had brought up was the electric windows project, and how the Cross Street building had this flat thing that they had to put in there that was eventually going to be programmed for art or other creative things, paying a homage to a nod to the, you know, the creative community in Beacon. And there definitely that could happen. If you'd have to program it, I think, but it could be an opportunity for people to do things like the building it has now. This Ron English just, you know, tricked out, graffitied his own building there.
Yeah,
And,
we were talking about maybe like internally projecting something, and it could be the clock for, you know, sometimes, and then on special occasions, yeah.
So we're all going to gather at New Year's for the ball drop.
We're going to show the planning board chairman's
There you go.
head on there.
The ball drop, that could be the New Year's ball drop. Just, okay, you get the credit.
Yeah.
But,
it doesn't,
yeah,
that creative stuff, it costs nothing to have a good idea, and it just, what it costs is the perseverance to not listen to other people, cut it down, and build support,
but, yeah, so, I mean, based on what we talked about, that's sort of, I mean, I'll check and see if there's additional details, but I think I have a good understanding of.
Do you think it's ready to come back and continue it as a group discussion?
I think it's at the point where we can continue the review here at the board.
Okay,
Doesn't mean the next time is the last review.
yeah. It's actually,
Sorry about that.
between the time it takes to do the renderings and the time between the ARB and the regular meeting, it might,
Better rhythm for
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
well, just, yeah, because then you'll see the most current stuff.
Yep. Okay. Do you have more to add? Yeah, I hope you're going to talk about traffic.
Very quick, traffic and landscaping.
Okay. So two kind of updates for you. First on parking. So based on comments from your traffic consultant from last month, we had taken another look at the parking in a different kind of way, looking at the number of bedrooms and things like that to see what we think the max parking generation is. At the end of the day, we came up with a new number of 91 parking spaces. So based on that, we added 3 additional parking spaces from the 88 that we previously had to the site plan. And another piece of that was there was a question about whether or not a restaurant or eatery type place could be in the commercial spaces down here. We have talked about that with the applicant, and we've indicated that that's not proposed here. We're not planning any of the things that would be needed for a restaurant or for this, so that wouldn't be something that would be possible. That could, if that was planned, it could change the parking demands then from a typical retail use or commercial use.
So I get it. You're not necessarily creating a development that had infrastructure that would immediately facilitate and support an eating establishment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone with a great, proposal and willing to pay rent couldn't come and otherwise, create a restaurant here.
Yeah, I mean, the applicant's position was they haven't had success or good history with restaurant-type uses in their facilities, so they don't really want one here. I think, could we put that as a condition of something, that if that's what the board wants?
Well, it's like, when you say stuff like that, I get it. This particular owner is not necessarily building something that could
but
facilitate or support an eating establishment.
My point would be
They could
that-
sell the building, or they could be, offered some really nice rent by an eating establishment and change their mind.
Right, and we've done this in previous applications where if it's a use that has to be before, the building inspector considers the parking calculation that's based on the site plan. So if there were proposed to go another story, or there was any other additions or changes, including tenancy, they're looking at the parking. So we're not proposing that in connection with this use, and it would have to come back before the board. To the extent that the parking doesn't meet, because the parking could change, the regulations could change. So the extent that the parking would exceed that demand, the building inspector would probably deny a permit and then require us to appear before the zoning board. Not necessarily the planning board, but the zoning board explicit to the parking.
Yep.
So the end result on that is we did add 3 additional spaces to provide some more parking on the site. The other update was, we did have a meeting with DOT last Thursday, and both John Russo and Ken Worsted were on as part of that call. And I think Ken had provided you, or board, with a letter kind of summarizing it, but I'll kind of give you my summary, which I think is pretty consistent with his. So we talked about a couple things. One of them, I'd previously mentioned that there's an adaptive traffic signal system along 9D from Beekman Street up to the I-84 ramps. It's installed, it's not currently functioning. They're waiting on the software vendor to do some programming of that, which they plan to have happen early next year, so January, February, and then it will be functional. So that is one item. We talked about what we've been recommending as far as improvements at the Beekman Street intersection relative to changing the phasing of that intersection to provide split phase, so Beekman Street would come out on its own phase, and Church Street would have its own phase separately when there's demand for that. DOT was supportive of making that change. The one thing that they did note is that we will have to look at the traffic signal to see if it can accommodate some additional loadings from changes that we would have to make to it. If it doesn't, we may have to replace the traffic signal, but that's just something that we would deal with as part of a highway work permit with the state. The one thing we were also recommending was potentially moving the crosswalk that's currently crossing 9D from the north side of the intersection to the south side of the intersection. They were not supportive of that. They want to keep that because of where they think people are walking from, and I understand their position on that. They did indicate that they would like to take a look at the pedestrian demands if there was a need for another crosswalk on the south side of the intersection, and also if that's something that the city desires, that we could potentially add that as part of the modifications. We talked about the potential future southbound right turn lane on 9D going on to Beekman Street. We clearly identified how there's sufficient right-of-way to accommodate that. DOT right now is not supportive of the right turn lane, but understanding that it could be done in the future and may be needed at some point down the line. Their reason for not supporting it is mainly for pedestrian safety. Their concern was that people making that right turn, trying to get down to the train, would kind of make that right turn in a quick manner, and then pedestrians may be a concern.
This is a right turn coming south on north down to Beekman, right?
This is, yeah, coming down 9D towards Beekman Street, you make the right turn
Headed
down
south
towards the
on
train
north,
station.
Yes, turning right on to Beekman, yep.
Yeah. And then the last thing, and this is more relative to the land acquisition, but DOT did confirm that they had done their internal circulation with their engineering groups, and that was completed last week, so we're waiting to hear some good news on comments back from that internal circulation from the real estate group. So that's the update.
I'm just curious, your traffic studies were performed without the, what is the term for the adaptive signaling, right?
Correct, yeah.
And you had some pretty low performing intersections. I think you had a D at one of them, right?
Yeah, I think certain movements, even at Beekman Street, were worse than that, to be honest with you. But with the changes that we're making, we're improving that intersection. In fact, do I have it here? I don't have it in front of me. That I believe it would be a level service D overall, which is considered an acceptable level of service at that intersection with the volume that it's accommodating.
What's the wait times on a D?
D goes to, from 30, Ken can correct me if I'm wrong, 35 to 45 seconds in average delay.
And I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, do I have that wrong, Ken? I think I have that wrong.
I think you're pretty close. Level service, at a signal, level service B would go up to about 20 seconds, C up to about 35, D above that to maybe 45, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine the DOT was able to opine on, right, when the adaptive signaling is introduced, the new programming, right? Whether they, I mean, I imagine the whole purpose of it is that they expect an improvement, right?
That's definitely the purpose of it. There's certainly studies that have been done about what kind of percentage improvement you can expect. Improvement's going to be different at different times of the day, right? So heavier volume, you may not see as much of an improvement. Lighter volume, you're going to see more of an improvement with the adaptive system. But the intention is that the adaptive, being able to adjust more freely to surges in demand, will provide an improvement for the entire corridor.
Okay.
And it could be like a 5, 10, 15%, improvement. It's certainly not a golden bullet, if you will, and makes everything, twice as good as it is now. But it is a way to squeak out a little bit more, capacity by being flexible, with the signal timings as volumes change.
Yeah, and I'm assuming there's somewhat of a coordinating effect with signals as they make their way north.
Yeah, that would be the intention as part of that as well. I mean, that's the DOT's project, that they're putting that in, but
Yep.
yeah, there should be a benefit that comes from that.
Up to 84.
Up to 84, correct.
Thank you, Natalie. He is hard to hear. Okay, so thanks. So we'll take, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no.
go
I didn't
ahead.
mean to interrupt, but if you were, the one question I had was whether or not anybody had analyzed what the impact of the turn lane would be. I know that they're not proposing it, but there's the improvement or some mitigation of the signaling. I have to, it sounds fine. But did the state or the DOT or anyone else compare the two options?
We did that early on. We had
Okay.
provided an analysis to the board. It was reviewed by Creighton Manning. It showed that, when we do our improvement, we get what we think is a fairly significant improvement. When we add the right turn lane, there is another incremental improvement on top of that, but it's not as significant as the other modifications that we're making.
Saying the signaling is maybe 10%? Is that what he said?
Well, no, that's the adaptive itself that the DOT is doing separately.
Separate? Okay.
Is Ken was saying between 5, 10, 15% maybe the improvement that you realize.
Right, not as part of this project. It's
That's
not driven-
separate,
you're not- It's the
right.
state's doing that
Right.
on its own. And
And
it's similar scale of improvement if you had a turning lane.
Say that again?
Would the improvement be on a similar, like a 10%, 15%, if you had a turning lane? It's incremental, it's not orders of magnitude. It's not,
Right,
you're not
right,
tripling the
exactly.
capacity or speed or ease of traffic or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing to remember is, it's not really, while we're here now, it's not just our project that's driving this, right? It's the train station, it's all the other developments that are coming off of Beekman Street, so.
I just want to get a sense of like what choices the city may have in the future if they want to deal with this, or the state. It's not necessarily your problem alone.
Yeah, and
But it's
I don't think the right turn lane is completely out of the question if that's something that needs to be pursued in the future.
Yeah.
I think just right now that they're
Right.
not, that they're balancing benefits of traffic flow and
Yeah.
pedestrian safety.
Yeah,
and-
I can understand why, that whole idea, ultimately, it ended up widening the Beekman opening, right? So it extends the pedestrian crossing there.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons you stated that the DOT mentioned to you all, that they're not necessarily in support of it, right?
They're not in support of us, of the right turn lane
Yes.
right now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
They are willing to look at it, possibly again in the future,
yeah,
because they were talking of the TOD project and the Metro North.
yeah. The DOT is talking about the TOD? The FACC?
The MTA?
So to your point, right, it is potentially, eventually, a relief mechanism if.
Right, and we're not preventing it from occurring if things change or we turn into a much larger city in the future or whatever, 'cause it's
No,
a
they've
big
shown it on the
intersection.
plans that they can fit it.
It can be
It's there,
accommodated.
it's
Right.
been
Okay.
reserved.
Yeah.
Yeah, even like the corner at the intersection, I think we've kind of laid that out, so if that right turn lane needed to go in, there would be some reconstruction, obviously, but we're not putting anything in there that's permanent, that can't be moved, right? So,
I have questions about that corner, but maybe it comes up in landscaping, because I've just seen some differences about that corner in the
the plan?
landscaping dimensional
Yes.
and the rendering, so.
That's the same.
Okay, so I just want
We're
to
not consistent.
understand what's happening there exactly, so maybe that's you, or maybe that's when we get to.
Justin.
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to go to Ken real quick to see if he wanted to maybe add some highlights based on the city's review.
Yeah, Rich gave a good overview of the meeting we had with DOT, and I think that covers most of it. Our previous comments have been addressed. The right turn lane, you know, if you focus in on the traffic, a right turn lane would be a benefit, because in the morning, you've got at least probably 1/3 of the traffic on that southbound approach of North Street is turning right, you know, to go down Beekman. And right now, they're mixed with, you know, through traffic. So the right turn lane would allow them to separate, and instead of one car going straight, one car turning right, and everything happening kind of single file, you could allow that to happen simultaneously, a through vehicle and a right turn vehicle. It frees up green time. And a lot of that could occur at the same time that the left turn arrow comes up as you are exiting Beekman Street. So there are some benefits to traffic, but they could be potential disbenefits to a pedestrian, you know, crossing the road. That's not to say that we should make all the lanes, you know, single lanes to make the crossings all as narrow as possible for pedestrians. But at least the option is preserved for the future, so that if the TOD project or other projects come online where it's getting to a point where, you know, traffic is really backed up just trying to get into the city and go down to the station, then that option is there to implement that when it's felt that it's needed.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening. Justin Dates, Colliers Engineering Design. So basically, the bulk of our modifications to our site plans had to do with how we're engaging, or how we modified that pedestrian corner on 9D and Beekman, and how it works with REA's new design of the corner of that Beekman building, or building 1. We did continue to show the extent of where that right turn lane would be. We were trying to keep these improvements outside of that. So say, you know, down the road in the future, that right lane turn is needed. We were trying to minimize, you know, what would need to be taken up or modified on that corner. So basically what happened is, with the opening of that corner of the building, we have 2 access points, kind of, you know, cat-a-corner on to access where the arcade opens up on the corner there, and an accessible ramp that goes down along that northern side of the building. We did maintain some type of, you know, sculpture area there. We thought that was a benefit, kind of a aesthetic access or accent to that corner, along with modifying the landscapes as needed for working around those new sidewalk areas. There was also a sidewalk that went along the frontage of that Beekman building on Beekman, that southern side. It's kind of like directly adjacent to the covered walkway. So we removed that, and actually that created more green space between that area and where you have a building access point off of Beekman. So with that increased green space, we did introduce some more canopy trees on that side that could be planted in that area with no utility conflicts. We also, as discussed at the last meeting, there was an area where the existing infrastructure, the subsurface piping, moves away from the curb line. So we were comfortable with putting in some street trees in that transition area now. And again, that really bolstered up the canopy presence of the trees within that frontage along Beekman for that building there. We had several maples in that green space between the 2 buildings. We moved those up closer to just behind the sidewalk, right? We wanted to, have that canopy help and benefit the sidewalk in between that connection of the two, or in between the two buildings there, from a shade, heat island effect. So we did some shifting to that. That's really the bulk of the changes that we made on the site plans.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So, yeah, no, I'm noting and acknowledging on your plans the addition of the street trees. There are two that make their way sort of more street adjacent, right? As
Correct.
you make your way south, but there's three also that are in that zone that you just described, more toward Beekman.
Correct.
That are more adjacent to the building.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Mostly driven by the existing utilities, like we had mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's understood.
Yep.
I guess my point is there is I'm glad to see that the utilities didn't preclude the ability to add trees. So
Correct.
I think as Natalie's been advocating quite strongly for a nice addition, a very nice addition. I think my questions, especially around how the corner is being handled, it's a little confusing from your application, what exactly is happening, like what's the most current proposal?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I just think from my letter, what I'm trying to get at is I think the preference is for like one entrance,
Yeah.
one plaza entrance, so that pedestrians coming from either crosswalk don't have to kind of walk down Beekman or walk down 9th Street to access it, which looks like, maybe that point's new, because it looks like that's kind of what's being recommended, and
I think in the rendering, it does show that, and I think that we can do that. Like I said, we were trying to minimize, if that right-hand turn lane comes through, be ripping out a portion of that whole plaza area there. So we kind of cut it off to try to help minimize that. I think that your recommendation of adding the pavers to that area, I don't think that's a problem. We could definitely do that, and it's probably, not such a labor-intensive modification should that right lane come through.
And then can we get past the grade change? Because I know some of the drawings we saw showed you had to have 2 different stairs, like.
We do have,
And a
yeah,
ramp, so are you able to change the grade enough so, because like in the renderings, if you go back to one of the renderings on the corner, it looks like it's just a gradual plaza entrance, so I didn't know if that was, what's
Yeah.
there.
that we would have to look at, because right now there's about a 3-foot grade change, like from intersection elevation to our finished floor. So it's really, I think it's 3 steps plus some of the pitch that we're getting across the plaza area. It's really insignificant in my mind, but we could take another look at that to see if that's going to require raising maybe the finished floor of the building up. It just puts us much higher on the 9D section, and everyone knows how Beekman really drops off from the intersection. So it may, it might make the height of that building on the western side there more prominent.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a 3-foot rise, Justin, from that intersection into your first floor?
Drop.
Or
So you come like from the intersection, and there's about 3 steps down.
But I'm just not seeing it in this.
Oh,
No,
those,
it's not
No.
shown in
those
here,
stairs
I
are
mean, I
going
don't-
down.
They're going down.
Yeah.
So this is, I don't, this doesn't capture
arrows.
that. This looks like it's going straight into the building there.
Understanding
Yeah.
all of, I just want to say that I think this corner became so much more successful in my view, in this most recent submission. I think it's partially to do with, chamfer, I'm not an architect, so I don't know what the actual term is, but cut the nose off. I think squaring that corner, and then what you did here with the plaza really makes this start to look like so I felt like it was successful how it was shown in the renderings. I just know you guys are dealing with grade change there, so that's why I wanted to question if that was actually possible, if we're just showing that in the renderings because it looks better.
Yeah,
If we could achieve
I agree.
it.
I think, the success of that corner has, I think, a lot, not only to do with the building, but how the grade changes and all of those different, the fact that you do have, steps coming down into the building, it's not evident here. I think
Correct.
we really need to understand what the cohesive solution looks like there,
Yeah.
right?
Understood.
And specifically, this idea, because this caught my eye originally when I was looking at this particular rendering, the orange triangle, that quote-unquote plaza, I don't know if it rises to the level of plaza. Plaza sounds fancy. This isn't fancy. If you're proposing putting those stamped concrete orange bricks there, please don't. Because,
No, I mean, we would look to do some type of paver or brick.
yeah, again,
That's
this corner
very-
is.
that's noted. We're not
super
talking-
important, and all
Yeah.
those stamped, I know they're put there by the city, but we don't want to replicate those. They are
Yeah.
really great zones for crabgrass to take root.
Understood.
So, yeah, I think that there's some more work in the refinement category to us really understanding how that plaza is being treated,
Okay.
especially with the landscaping, especially with the hardscaping, and especially with the grade changes.
Understood. Does-
Can I make a recommendation for this? It seems like you're placing a number of elements that are required on the site and then putting things around it to decorate that, okay? I'm just, I hope that it doesn't seem too unkind. But what you should be doing is thinking of it as a place, right? And develop unifying elements. So if you have a grade change, one way to deal with that is to have like, let's say a semicircular, an octagonal, or some sort of wall or feature that ties those different stairs together, right? That creates two different levels, right? And then the stairs just are a transition in that area, and there's a planter in between it. Let's say, I'm just throwing that idea out there. That way, you can have something that's visually cohesive. It has one design element, right? A theme that ties it together. Maybe it ties into the building, right? And the various themes that are in this building already. And then you integrate the ramp, or you make the ramp work with that, right? The way that this is sort of set up now, and it's, like I said, it's a series of solutions to like grade change problems, as if this was the back of a warehouse area that just needed access to get to the dumpsters. You know, it's really just not thought through at all, and it deserves. It's going to be one of the most potentially a really valuable part of the building, right? Driving pedestrian use, driving people wanting to go there, making it a human space. If you just do these things that are like entrances and they're just the symbols of a door, and you don't have actual people using them, you know, you sort of actually don't take full advantage of your opportunities. Anyway, so I think you have to really think, like a designer, it deserves a design response instead of a lot of small moves, you know?
Careful,
Okay,
Kevin,
we can
you're
take a
starting to
look
sound like me.
I'm
That's great. Thank you.
Just a quick question. Does the board, now with kind of explaining how there is that grade change, are you leaning towards a more of a straight-in access?
No.
It
no.
doesn't have to, okay.
Something thought through, something
Gotcha.
cohesive, something that makes sense.
Okay.
And I agree with Kevin. It looks like just a mishmash of things thrown in.
We need 2 gangways, slap them in here.
Yeah, okay, let's put a sculpture display area, boom. Even its orientation, it's like, is it really thought through? Right? So I think that's the sum total of the comments.
Okay. We can take another look at it, yeah.
Yeah, but take inspiration from the location and from like what you're doing there, right? And those things, you can use those little bits of the existing context to make a gesture that's bigger, right? That pulls it together and
Yeah.
makes it a place instead of a series of stuff on the ground, you know?
Yeah, and just another little add, like when you think about offering a space to a sculptor, right? What is a sculpture? It's a 3D thing that captures light. And, you know, is this oriented in a way to potentially, you know, inhibit a nice piece of sculpture being viewed the way it should be, right? So it's that kind of thing, right?
Okay.
Instead of just, oh, we need to maybe make a nod to the arts community, here's a spot for a sculpture, boom. Is it really thought through to the degree to which a sculptor would actually want to display their art there?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Understood. We'll take another shot at it.
I do appreciate
Now,
the
now your
street
attorney's
trees
going to
and
yell at me.
You damn right.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Sorry, Natalie, go ahead.
Yell at Kevin, because he started it.
Again, I think this is, what's important to discuss is the right direction, right? There was a lot of conversation in the past months leading us to the right direction, and I think we've been on that throughout, and we're moving that forward. I think importantly, it's just looking at this, and we're getting into very specific details, not a broader, potentially significant impact. It's something that is important. We understand the importance of that. We're going to keep going in the right direction and working that into the project, but I think importantly, these are very specific details.
Appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. And the reason it's going in the right direction is because we're so vocal.
Absolutely.
And, I'll add, your applicant is very cooperative.
Indeed. And I wanted to say it earlier, it's not going to land anymore, but I'm also down with TOD and DOT, you know. You know me. Nah, I know.
Stop. Oh.
This is what happens when you don't give him enough attention. Starts really like swinging for the fences.
Attorneys trying to rap. Man, that's worse than architects trying to rap.
Couldn't work in Shamford, it was easier with that.
Like architecture comedy, it's like, it's really
an
bad
art.
when it fails.
I appreciate the effort, though. It sounds like we've covered the majority of your comments, but I don't think we've even touched upon yours, although it sounds also like there's still a lot of work to do, right?
They're working on it. They're waiting for more or less from confirmation from DOT with regards to the land acquisition.
Yep.
But they have been proceeding forwards. They still have some field work. They're working on location of sewer laterals from some of the homes. So they've got some minor work to do, but I think the biggest hang-up is honestly DOT at this point.
Yep.
What's the issue with the High Street parking setback? The setback for the parking lot?
It's about the setback from the roadway.
Right.
It was in one of the past letters. So because they're facing two street, the property faces on High Street and Beekman and 9D technically, there's some of the parking that's within,
Let's call it front yard per se.
Yeah.
the linkage district has setback requirements for parking to specifically be 40 feet back or whatever feet back from the, so because they have that High Street, they're, I think.
4 spaces are partially within the setback.
Is it 20 feet or 40 feet? I couldn't remember.
It's 40, and it's not 40 feet from the street, it's 40 feet from the lot line, so we're set back further from the, so in theory, we don't meet the standard because we don't meet the standard as written, but it's set back from the lot line rather than from the street.
Okay, so it's,
So 4 spaces like encroach into that setback that's in the code that would limit us by about a few feet. So it's a 40-foot setback, but we encroach slightly for 4 of those spaces.
And there's landscaping that you guys have put, so I don't see it as a huge request. I mean, it is the code, so it's, you know, but
I was curious, I mean, I saw the statement of the report, and I didn't really get any idea of what context of, how significant the
Right, rather than a parking, a numeric
the front yard
threshold,
issue,
it's,
side yard issue,
It's
whatever
not
it
hugely
was.
significant, but it's there.
Okay.
and it's only portions of the spaces, it's not the whole
Not the whole space.
space.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, now that I'm seeing this on the site plan, it makes
Clear.
see it better.
All right. Any other questions, comments of the applicant or on the board or of our engineers and planner?
I have a question on the landscaping. Can you talk about your strategy for buffering the west property line? Is it just planting? Is there a fence? Like, what's happening back there?
So the west, right now, we're proposing to maintain as much as, so there is a hill that goes up to the back of the High Street buildings there. So we are looking to maintain as much of that existing vegetation that's there, and then really we have directly behind our parking area, we have a mixed, evergreen planting that we're looking to do, where we're proposing some of our site disturbance for grading things. So when we get that cleaned up, we'll put in a full screen row behind our parking, as well as some of the canopy trees that are mixed into that area as well.
And on the driveway lane out to Tompkins,
Yes.
on the west side, there are some significantly large trees there. Are they on your property or are they on the neighbor's property? There's a very large pine.
Yeah, there's
Or-
a couple, I think, spruces
Yeah.
that are right along there. I think they are right on the property line. I forget the exact location of those, but
Are you planning on keeping those?
we would, yeah, if they're right on the property line, we would look to keep those. We do have minimum grading kind of going on there with a swale along that western side of the proposed driveway, but yeah, we'd look to maintain those as best we can. I have to look at our tree preservation plan again, just to
Okay.
confirm.
I would encourage you to take a look at that whole, like the whole back, and particularly along the driveway. It's very uniform planting. I think some diversity would help, mixing in some canopy trees in addition to the evergreens, maybe having some more variety of evergreens. And then on the east side of that driveway out to Tompkins, I think you could take a look to see what more you could do in that area. I know that there's some infrastructure, underground infrastructure that you need to take into consideration, but I think that warrants some, another look.
And could you, I'm sorry, what you mentioned regarding...
Between the
west-
driveway that goes out to Tompkins and 9D, there's a,
Oh, okay.
there's like a
that kinda
seated
there.
area.
Yeah, okay.
So-
Okay. And then just to go back one minute on where you talk about the west, you were looking for maybe a few more canopy trees?
Yeah, I just think a more diverse planting would be helpful.
Okay. Diverse in species or
Both, yeah.
form?
Species and form.
Gotcha, okay. All right, we can look at that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
While I'm fresh out of jokes for this application, there is, part of DOT's conversation is trying to potentially give us more right-of-way than we asked for. We don't know where that'll go, but if there is more opportunity in their right-of-way, there may be more opportunity there for more of that. So right now, it's not, but they volunteered it to us, so we're sort of seeing where that plays out.
Okay. So if it does come to pass,
There
there'll
could be more
some impact
opportunity
to
there.
the
Yep.
planting.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thanks. All right, anything else, board? Anything else, applicant?
That's it for us. Only thing we'd ask, I think generally, I know this is
No,
perfect.
because I know what you're going to ask. It's too early.
It's definitely, I don't know, respectfully, I disagree, but if I may, just for the benefit of the board.
Please.
Might consider talking with your council about preparing at least secret documents where we could start to discuss those specifics. I know traffic has been sort of a regular occurrence, but I think your traffic consultant tonight explicitly said, and I'll let Ken speak for himself, but that we've addressed the comments that they've presented. And I think furthermore, the architectural design, really, that has been the other driving force here. To the point where hopefully we can discuss whether or not the project has any potentially significant adverse environmental impacts. So potentially secret documentation about the project.
Yeah, are you talking specific about neg deck?
Well, right, just at least discussion of the Part 2, which would presume would lead to a negative declaration.
What do you think?
I mean, typically, we review the Part 2. In conjunction with the negative declaration, you could review the Part 2 at a separate meeting and then decide whether you're ready to authorize a negative declaration.
What's the advantage to doing this right now as opposed to when this is one or two steps along further?
Yeah, it just moves things along, basically.
I don't think there are others. The only steps are this and a public hearing. So procedurally, we want to move forward with those specific determinations so that we could hopefully then proceed to a public hearing.
And I know you can't commit to a specific timeline with DOT, but do you have a rough estimate of when they might conclude their process and when that land, if they're going to approve the conveyance?
I told Rich Christmas.
I think you told me a lot earlier than Christmas, actually. The best I can say is I'm expecting something this week from them based on what I heard last week. What that means, I don't know, but there's going to be a whole process after that where we actually go and acquire the property, right? So, but at least we'll have I think we'll have an indication of where they're coming from this week still, at some point, so.
So how about this? Because I'd rather, one of the scenarios is, yeah, you get your Christmas present, and things move along, right? But then by next meeting, we'll all be much more comfortable moving ahead with something that, in the alternate scenario, we'd somewhat have to kind of pause and then revisit, right, while you relooked at your application, right? Because this is somewhat of a hinge topic.
Well, interestingly enough, seeker does cover more than just the DOT's lands. I'm saying interesting enough, the seeker does contemplate more than just the DOT conveyance. So I think we might be able to initiate conversations.
What the chairman's saying is like, if the DOT comes back, and hopefully they don't, but if they do come back and say, sorry, we're not going to convey the land, then
it's a whole different ball of wax.
It's a completely different project, right?
Indeed, and I think we would have to reapproach the process, or at least reopen the seeker determination, but I think the applicant feedback has been positive, and more so than we've asked for. So I think I appreciate that concept. I think all we're asking is that the board initiate the discussion. We're not suggesting a negative declaration be considered at your meeting, but I think we're asking that the board talk seeker in January.
Any thoughts around the board?
Traffic, and what are the other secret issues that are?
Traffic and visual, I think, have been the main two. I mean, I could certainly prepare a part two for you to, review for your next meeting.
Yeah.
And it would be based on, obviously, the project that we've been reviewing with the DOT right-of-way included.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the request, and it's really, basically at risk, right? If something changes, we would have done that work for nothing.
And just
Or it would need to be altered.
It'll be talking about the part two, but you won't have the.
Exactly.
For illustration, for the benefit of the board, I think it's just some of those that were on the board may recall, the Edgewater project, for example, received a negative declaration for 300-plus units. The city council changed zoning, and ultimately the application came back before you for
Things had to
a
change.
modified or a reaffirmation, or it was reduction by number, but it came back before you because of change.
Yeah, no, we know we can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's times when, we're tired and we choose not to. So, but in this case, yeah, let's consider moving ahead with requesting Jen's office, at least go so far as sharing the draft part two. Yeah? Thoughts?
I agree.
I don't see a huge problem with it. It's a lengthy process, and
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll help, sort of facilitate the discussion too, to identify, are there
Yep.
any is there additional information that you need from the applicant in order to move forward?
It'll focus us in, yeah.
Yeah.
I think just to facilitate that conversation would be helpful. There's been a lot of submissions and some stuff included in the beginning and then
Right.
not
Yeah.
carried through, lighting plans and things like that. So some kind of indication in the cover letter of like what the most recent document is we should be looking at, or if there's a change to things like the lighting plan and stuff like that.
Okay.
Just so we don't waste time reviewing things that are going to be updated.
Okay.
Great, okay. So, motion to authorize Jen's office to begin draft part two for review next month.
motion.
Motion by Kevin,
Second.
second by Karen. All in favor?
Aye.
So, early Christmas present from the board to you.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Have a Kwanzaa.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. They start on the same day
They do.
this year. Okay, anything else? Or are you here for you're standing there for the next application?
I can sit down.
Do you want to do, okay, yes, I've had a request. This didn't originate from me.
Second.
Someone named Karen requested a quick break. All right, we're going to continue our regular meeting and make our way to item number 2, which is the continued review of applications for site plan approval and subdivision approval. Mixed use, commercial use, and residential, 420, 430 Fishkill Avenue, submitted by DKH Realty. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. If if I may. I really like that last presenter. For the record, my name is Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant, DKH Realty LLC. Tonight I'm joined by our project architect, Chris Raffaelli, our project engineer, Mike Bodendorf, masquerading for Mr. Kohler, as well as Rich D'Andrea of Colliers Engineering. I'm also joined by the applicants, Jay, Dwight, and Dylan Healy. As you stated, Mr. Chairman, we are here before you in connection with our continued review of our application for a lot line adjustment removal and site plan approval to adaptively reuse the existing building for a proposed as-of-right mixed-use development, including a Dunkin' Coffee House and accessory drive-through, as well as additional first-floor commercial space and 3 residential units on the second floor. So I think this is a pretty good example of a mixed-use development in this corridor. For the record, the building inspector did issue a determination with regard to the application being an as-of-right permitted use as a coffee house and accessory drive-through. We didn't have the benefit of submitting that earlier, but it has now been made part of the record. Before I do turn it over to Chris and I was going to say Dan, but Mike, to go over the changes to our site plan, I did just want to steal some of their talking points and just give you some of the brief updates, sort of in a summary fashion for your benefit. Which was detailed in our November submission. So we did include a proposed crosswalk across Fishkill Avenue to the sidewalk across the street with Townsend Street. We know there's some comments from the consultants to speak to that, which we'll try and address this evening. That would allow a path, or to give Jennifer the shivers, a future connection trail path to the future connection Fishkill Trail and or Heritage Trail, whatever it may be. But in any event, we also proposed an outdoor patio area with 3 tables adjacent to the coffee house, as well as a bike rack that was added with some benches and landscaping at the rear. We did include some other updates to sort of the reconfiguration entrances and exits to the site, which Rich will speak to specifically because it deals with deliveries, among other considerations. Chris will more importantly discuss the integration of the black and metal accents, as well as red brick elements. I always call it beacon brick. REA sent me the actual colors before, and I do have that in my files, as well as what I used to have, which was the 1964 determination. REA had printed that out from historic records. In any event, it is consistent, or is designed to embody some of the elements that the FAC, or the Fishkill Avenue Committee, is recommending. I call it FAC. For the 393, 397 Fishkill Avenue building, that was Mr. Haug's building. So that project, so it's trying to incorporate some of that into the design. One last key piece, and this is trademarked, so if you all try and use it, I've already had my associates file that, but it's probably already been done before, so it's definitely going to get rejected. But it's an area along the property's frontage. Part of what you heard from the FAC committee this meeting is trying to create some interaction or pedestrian or overall operations in the area, whether it's sidewalks or parking on street, and recommendations that haven't been finalized and are in the process of being put together. So we're contemplating, in the way we characterized it along the frontage, is sort of like a sidewalk bank. I can't even say my own trademark term. It's not as trendy sounding as land bank, but the concept being that we would propose to install or incorporate a design as the committee ultimately recommends down the road, so that we'd propose some type of improvement, be it a sidewalk or otherwise as the board sees fit, but not necessarily either construct it so that it could be modified, again, for the applicant to install once the committee comes up with it. That way, we can be consistent with those recommendations, but ultimately provide some benefit, or what we would propose, but again, not holding up anything that the FAC committee may be working on. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Raffaelli. Oh, sorry.
Just so I'm clear on what you're talking about in terms of this sidewalk bank, is that on this, what you're referring to as the proposed 5-foot area for pedestrian use?
Yes, you may recall we were all the way up on the street and sort of utilizing even some of the pedestrian or the city's right-of-way in our initial proposal. There were comments and feedback to not do that. So ultimately, we sort of walked, pun intended, that back to bring it into the site, but we're suggesting that whatever, similar to a land bank parking area, where it's saying, look, we don't necessarily need this parking area, but in some future, someone says we do, we have to build it at our cost. We're suggesting here that, A, we don't know what the FAC's recommendations may be ultimately, which may change for the next 6 months to a year or never be implemented. So we're proposing to walk back, maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. You want to know what we're proposing?
Can we zoom in a little bit?
Yeah,
I
no,
hope if we
I
could-
know, I think you got it. I needed to clarify this, so there's that zone.
We still have the sidewalk area we're proposing internal to the site, but what we're suggesting is that we may not, if the board sees fit, we wouldn't necessarily construct it, or we'd leave it being just an area marked out where it could be used, where it could be fully constructed at a later date once the FAC has recommendations.
So that's where I'm a little confused. You just said internal to the site, but that zone I'm referring to is outside your lot line.
I'll have Mike speak to the actual area, and
Yeah,
then
okay.
the concept, though, is what we're really considering. Like, we're showing an improvement,
I get the
but
concept.
to the extent that the city finds otherwise, rather than installing a sidewalk that gets ripped up, similar to what's going on the other side of the street, we'd be holding it back until those recommendations are ready, and then installing ultimately what's there. But we're creating an area that could account or allow for city recommendations as it proceeds. So, instead of Chris, I'll go to Mike.
Thanks, Taylor. Okay, just to clarify this area, here's our property line here. This hatched area that almost, it sort of looks like rectangular pavers here is a 5-foot wide swath. That could be a sidewalk, could be something else. And then you're left with about another 7 feet or so of area outside that white line or the travel lane. So you have roughly 13 feet out between the white line and our property line to provide the pedestrian experience with what the committee comes up with.
Understood. Right.
Your proposed concrete curb landscaping goes right up to the property line.
Correct. Which could be adjusted if there's certain design elements that may intrude into there. And just to touch on a couple more, if we want to stay on that subject for a minute. Sure.
So what happens if the committee ultimately comes up with and the city council implements a plan that would include improvements outside of that hatched area, like in the white strip between what you've hatched and the roadway? Are you saying
Are you talking about this area here?
that the applicant
7 foot.
is agreeing that whatever would be proposed in that hatched area, the applicant will install, but if there's anything outside of that, that won't be the applicant's responsibility?
I'll answer more specifically. Yeah, within reason, we're not going to install gold-plated, yellow brick road there. I mean, I'm obviously being quite flippant, but intentionally, it's just if there are sidewalks or a curb or what's consistent with what's, not out of the realm of unreasonable. Like, we proposed the sidewalk originally and curbing.
Yeah.
That's consistent with what we're doing. So how that's languaged or wordsmith is certainly for discussion, but we wanted to make sure that we were accounting for what the board was, or what has been a concern at least, which is making sure that whatever may come isn't influenced or impacted by this, and that this could evolve with that project rather than build it twice.
Right, but the reserved area, the hatched area, is outside of
Yes.
your property line in the right-of-way.
Right, and I think to the extent that we would propose using that area, which we're not really, if that's incorporating a design that's going to make this pedestrian experience better or more better than what we're proposing in our site plan, I mean, it seems to work. It's a win-win overall. The city's getting at least a portion of this work if it comes to be, just like the future rail connection, the future, all these things are in the future, but we're trying to account for that to the best we can, similar to what we did for Carvana, where there was considerations of what could be in the future. So we're doing a lot of that on the site. The same is true, I think, we mentioned it in the prior application, and you'll see it, you see it on the site plan here with the connection from, across to Townsend through the site. We do have a path and connection there. So we have a lot of things that we have done that anticipate may not come to pass. Hopefully they do, but we're really trying to account for that in this whole process.
Yep. So just to summarize, suffice it to say, thank you, right? So there's some consideration potentially for the applicant to make improvements outside the property line within that zone, at a minimum, to be a
Yes.
5-foot sidewalk.
Yep.
And so, yeah, so I think to Jennifer's question is, what if the city comes back with, for example, 12-foot sidewalk? Right? Then are we only stuck with you guys paying for half a sidewalk? So that's kind of the question.
Right, but if we get to that level of detail, I think we're all going to be in agreement that is such a marginal difference. I think the point is, we want to make this work, and we don't want to necessarily build something, because the alternative is the applicant builds what's proposed, right, a sidewalk, which is consistent with what might otherwise exist, and then the city comes in and says, well, we hate that idea.
I get it.
We want to change it
get
and
it.
rip it up and then build it itself.
That part is absolutely clear. So, yes,
Or if they do the sidewalk on their property, then it doesn't align with future sidewalks that are
Totally
off
get
the
it.
property, and then you have like a circuitous, like a waving back and forth sidewalk too, so.
Yep.
And it allows for the,
Based on what's going on here, it makes some sense to hold off
Right.
doing this.
Totally.
Okay, big picture.
Yes.
I'm a little concerned about the actual details of how it gets done and what the limits are. Like aside from 12-foot sidewalks, what if nothing happens right now in 5 years in the future?
It's a great point.
The city does something and they're like, oh yes, we want you to build a sidewalk now. Maybe you sold the building to someone else.
it'll be, it's absolutely right, and as I've trademarked the phrase, the sidewalk bank, it would be similar to a land bank parking agreement. So the city, we record those. So when we do a land bank agreement, even though it's conditioned in your approval, there's an officially recorded document that says whether it's Healy, whether it's Mr. Jensen, whoever the future heirs and assigns are all obligated to do it. So that's a risk of any purchaser.
That it is just a matter of coming up with acceptable terms on the document.
Yeah, and I say it's not as, great sounding as land bank. I know that one sounds good compared to sidewalk bank, but.
I think if you're drafting the document, you are more than, definitely call it sidewalk bank, because you really want to.
Can you clarify for me? You are, that you're saying that you're committing to put in the planning agreement, future work, right?
Yeah, it's the same-
Whatever
yep.
the consistent and consensually, whatever consensus agreement is on that goes there, that'll be part of successors and assigned. It's an obligation that goes with the land.
Correct.
Okay.
Cool, okay. I think we beat that one to death.
I wasn't aware that was.
No, I'm not,
thing.
yeah, I'm not.
You see it, right, that's why I'm just sort of.
Calling anyone out.
Comparing it to a land bank parking agreement, because you see it much more frequently that way, but the same could be true of a landscaping, there could be all kinds of versions of this, they just don't call it something as cool as a sidewalk bank.
I was gonna say it one more time. Say it one more time.
All right, Mike, do
Say
you want
it
to go?
3 times and somebody will appear or something.
Yeah.
Okay. What other little chestnuts do you have for us?
Okay, so just to sort of piggyback on Taylor's description of major changes, or the key changes that have happened to this site, he mentioned the crosswalk across Fishkill Avenue, the connection trail, which is in concept to the future rail trail, the patio on the north side of the building, which shifted this parking northward. That resulted in some lost spaces on this side, some lost spaces in this little pod here. We gained a space in this pod because that area got longer. And then if I move to the south end of the site, we've restricted this entrance to deliveries only and removed 4 parallel spaces along this corridor here for a loading zone. And to delineate between the drive-through and the escape lane, we previously had these candlestick pylons, or bollards, if you will. We are now proposing a mountable curb to sort of deter people from sort of cutting in on that drive-through lane and getting in trouble. I believe that covers all the layout changes, at least the key changes that have occurred on this site. And, we understand there's a lot of engineering to do, the landscaping, lighting, so forth, but we just wanted to get a general idea from the board as to the acceptance of a layout before we work through those details.
I'm super curious, and actually this I know Natalie's also addressed in her letter, but as far as parking for the apartments, where are those intended?
Oh, thank you. So
All
we
the
have
way-
4
all the way
designated
on the other
spaces
side?
over here for the residents.
Oh, 8. No.
4 tenant-only parking sign,
Oh, that note that says tenant-only parking sign.
so there's 4 spaces with that.
Thank you. I hadn't scrolled. Got it. All the way on that side of the parking lot. So those tenants have to walk across a parking lot.
Across the drive-through travel lane, to get.
Yeah, I think that was one of my comments, just looking at so right now we're showing a little bit of it looks like there's a crossing between the ADA, kind of going to where there was maybe that's left over from when there was a formerly, so we're showing some kind of way for you to get out of the ADA loading space and get to the crosswalk. I was just thinking we could discuss similar, again, thinking about the pedestrian experience here. You're gonna have those residents parking in that bank, which I get that it's a little less turnover, so that's why it's maybe kind of pushed off to the side there. But let's think about how they're gonna safely get across the drive-through exit lane, and folks are gonna get to that plaza and space like that. Maybe there's space for some kind of landscape island or refuge or crossing there, so that there's a clear indication of drivers where they should expect folks to be walking through those parking lanes.
Right.
And, you know, just that connection laterally across this site, I think ties a few of these things together. The outdoor plaza, the resident parking, and the public kind of space and crosswalk that could lead to the rail trail. So that connection could be helpful.
Sure. We'll look into that and come up with something.
Yeah, okay. All right, anything else?
I think my other comment, just keeping with the, sorry. I was just jumping in.
Please? No, go ahead.
I think the other pedestrian, just thinking about, I do appreciate the crossing across Fishkill Avenue, across Route 52. It is a mid-block crossing, so I'm interested to kind of hear from traffic perspective, you know, what we experienced down at the Mill Street crossing, which is also a mid-block crossing that has that dummy light, is that folks don't actually stop there, you know, or don't necessarily yield to the pedestrian. So my request was to, again, also look at that to see what else could be done there with high visibility. Maybe it's flashing lights, maybe it's just different materials for the crossing to just try and, or raised, whatever it is, to try and make sure that folks would actually yield there if there was a pedestrian crossing. We're just not seeing that further down the corridor.
Yeah, I think we certainly can take a look at that. Again, it's going to be a balance of what do we install now versus what is the recommendations from the committee, I think, right? So, but we can certainly take a look at that. So, for traffic parking, actually, I want to touch on the site plan before you go away from what you're on. So one of the things that we took a look at was deliveries, and I know that was mentioned, but that southern driveway is planned for deliveries only. We did look at the truck turning to get through the site for a kind of a 30-foot box truck and a 33-foot tractor trailer, and as well as a garbage vehicle. All those vehicles we show coming in through that deliveries only driveway on the south side. The deliveries would use that loading zone. Obviously, there's two different garbage dumpsters where the garbage pickup would be. We've talked with the applicant because one of the things that we found out is anything bigger than that 33-foot trailer really doesn't work well through this site. So that's one thing that we've identified, that we can restrict it to that 33-foot trailer size. And then there's some other modifications within the site. There's a hatched island at the exit of the drive-through there, and then a hatched island up at the Fishkill Avenue, actually the next one, that are all kind of there to allow for those truck maneuvers through the site.
Rich, if the trucks and everything are coming in on the entrance, that's on the left side there.
Yep.
Why do we need the striped island at the end of the parking aisles?
So they're going to come in there, but they're going to go out through, they're going to go past the drive-through and go out through.
Straight through, right, so why does it need to be striped? If they're going straight out?
Oh, that one?
That one.
Oh, that one, sorry. I didn't know which one you were talking about. I don't know. We could take a look at that. It may not need to be, yeah.
You know, and.
I know that was something that we had earlier that maybe have been a carryover from that also, so we can take a look at that.
I mean, that can also work in what Natalie was saying as far as a pedestrian island for them to come across. Maybe you shift the parking for the residents.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Okay.
One other thing on the site plan was a recommendation of Creighton Manning was looking to align the driveway with the exit from the drive-through, which we did do. So now that anybody coming out of the drive-through is directly going to the driveway to get out. Previously, it was shifted a little bit south and aligned with that. The drive aisle closest to the building there. So I'm sorry. I think it was the drive-through. No, that's all right. The driveway was aligned with that drive aisle closest to the building, so you would have to like snake your way out instead of going on a straight shot. So we did make that change. On parking, so the site requires, per code, between 22 and 41 parking spaces. We have done a shared parking analysis here. We looked at we ended up with 33 parking spaces, even with the 4 spaces designated for the residential parking is what's being required. We show 35 on the site plan. One of the things we did note was that there is some use of the parking on the site currently for the laundromat that's just to the north of this, so we thought that those additional spaces could just be provided in case that needed to occur in the future as well.
Are you talking about the little T, yeah, up there?
Well, we didn't designate those as specifically for that, but just in general, there's 2 additional parking spaces above what we are saying the analysis shows we need. So if there is somebody that needed to park in here to go to the laundromat, it could happen, because we know that is happening. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. And then I think the only other thing is really on the traffic analysis. So it's been reviewed by Creighton Manning. We had an initial study, we did some revisions, and was reviewed again. So I think at this point, everything's been addressed as far as Creighton Manning's comments, but just in general, we took a look at Townsend Street and Conklin Street. We took into account the other 4 projects that I'm aware of along the corridor, 25 Townsend, 397 Fishkill, 410 Fishkill, which is Carvana, and then the Beacon lofts and storage as well. In general, basically we see that all the intersections are going to operate at a level of service D or better. It's pretty typical for the unsignalized intersections along this corridor. Our analysis was somewhat conservative because we did take a look at the total traffic generation is what we analyzed, but in reality, a lot of the traffic for the Dunkin' specifically is going to be attracted from the existing traffic that's coming along the corridor. So the driver will experience 100 so trips an hour in the morning, but at the other intersections along the corridor, you experience less because people that are passing there today may stop at Dunkin'. So that we didn't account for that, but
What?
so you're driving to work on a normal trip. You're passing this site. You don't stop at Dunkin' today, but Dunkin' goes in. You may stop at Dunkin'. You're not a new trip to the roadway system. So you're not new to the intersections.
So you're not taking into account, I get that, but what you're saying is you're not taking into account the fact that this new establishment might draw more traffic as a destination.
No, I'm saying we're not drawing more. We're accounting for everything that we're gonna draw, right? But in reality, we're actually not adding as many new trips to the corridor.
Well, what you're saying
Clarify,
is
Rick.
that a percentage of the clientele are people already traveling that route,
Yes,
and that a certain percentage aren't.
yeah.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so that's clear. That clarifies. So I'm just curious, do you know the sort of breakdown of what?
Of what percentage it could be? I mean, we have data on what it could be. It could be we say it could be as much as 40% based on ITE. Typically, we analyze something lower than that, but in this, we were conservative and we didn't take that credit at all, so.
So look, I've got a question.
Yep.
I'm visualizing this, like,
Sure.
I'll put a little bit of a personal narrative. I'm at my office, I'm making iced coffee. There's no place in Beacon to get that right now, right? I think the biggest you can get is 16 ounces. Right? I think I bake iced coffee.
Yeah.
I get in my car, because while it's walkable, it's over half
Sure.
a mile, I kind of got stuff to do. I'm gonna go here once or twice, max, and I'm gonna observe that the signs that say deliveries only are just some parking lot signs, so who really cares, and that it would save me a lot of time to just turn right and go directly into the drive-through lane as opposed to doing this whole go up to the right entrance and drive in front of the stores. Why does it make sense to have the deliveries only sign in the first place and not direct the drive-through traffic through there and instead make them drive in front of the store?
So there's two things. So when we look at queuing for the drive-through, at peak times, we pretty much need to accommodate probably 12 vehicles is probably the peak that we're going to see. And if you look in, I don't think we have it here, but if you looked in our traffic study, there was a figure in our traffic study for the queuing of that drive-through. The queuing extends basically almost to the start of the parking in the front of the building, right? So the other side, yeah, right in there. So it doesn't reach the parking, but it almost gets there if you had 12 vehicles, right? So now if we allow people to start coming in through that deliveries only driveway, they may try to sneak into that queue, and it causes a little bit of an issue.
I see the issue.
Can I give a quick follow-on question on that? Are there other Dunkin' Donuts with apartments, residential units above them? And I guess my question is right now, is thinking about during peak times, vehicles idling right at the foot, below your windows of your apartment, and what that would be like if you were opening your windows from both a noise and an odor perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, absolutely, there are. They're all over the place. I can think of 3 that I've worked on. There's also ones that are in complexes that may not have a drive-through, but that's a different story. But ones with drive-throughs definitely have apartments above them. I've seen them, I've worked on them.
Because that drive-through line goes right around the...
Yeah, the same is true in downtown with the banks that have had drive-throughs and others. There are other uses that utilize a drive-through as well that have vehicles that idle and the like, but it certainly is a consistent, it typically happens.
And again, the alternative is we're talking about parking vehicles and turning them off and then turning them back on, driving away, which doesn't really seem like much of an improvement.
I think importantly, just to go off of what Mr. DeAndrea was saying with respect to the queuing analysis, you typically don't get a site that has this much queuability, also not a word trademark, but we have operations on the site, having worked with other Dunkins, they've gone through a process historically where they were quick to adopt the pre-order system. Many people will pre-order before they go. They're not ordering from the window and waiting to pick up. Many people, and a big percentage of them, pre-order before they go to the store. So they leave their apartment, or in Mr. Jensen's case, his office, he pre-orders it, so he goes there, gets in and gets out. You're in and through the site. So this site has a lot of operability. They also have the ability to pull up vehicles. They call it line busting. I can't trademark, they already did that. They have line busting tablets and operations that can be utilized. This site doesn't even need that. It has so much queuing capacity, but also has, again, if there were ever a queuing concern, it has additional areas where vehicles can be pulled up. You may have been to a fast food restaurant where they've had something to that effect. This, again, is not, for all intents and purposes, this operation is very precise, and Dunkin' typically has very quick turnover because the focus is coffee. Over 60% of the retail is typically of beverages, coffee or beverages.
Look, at the end of the day...
We've all been to Dunkin's.
Well, again, it's important because it's not a fast food, it's restaurant, it's a coffee house, and it's the drive-through focuses on the beverages.
Yeah.
It's distinct from very different than a fast food restaurant.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the residential is a permitted use. Is it ideal? I'll leave that as rhetorical.
Well, I think it's important that it's a mixed use, right? That was a big fact conversation tonight.
That's my point.
Right.
It is a mixed use. It's part of a permitted use. Is it ideal? I'll leave it rhetorical.
Let me just try to throw input in here, or at least spitball this issue. But I mean, coming back to these entrances coming in and flagging it as deliveries only. Correct me if I'm wrong, there's not going to be that many trucks making deliveries. There's going to be a lot of people coming through the drive-through. What if you presumptively had both lanes available for drive-through use, and you went out, restricted deliveries to non-peak times of the day, and just blocked off lanes as appropriate? Because it does seem like you get a much better traffic design if you're not forcing cars to go in front of those other businesses. I don't know, I mean, think about it. I'm just a lawyer, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about...
So, I mean, in the scenario that you're laying out, you're saying use both lanes as the drive-through?
Yeah, like you go to...
You would need, well, you would need 2 order boards, and then you would have to merge. And the other thing that we like to have on these sites, because it happens all the time, whether you would do it or not, is an escape lane, right? So that's the other thing that this provides, is that second lane. If somebody's in the drive-through and they realize, no, I don't want to wait anymore, then they don't want to order, they can get out and go around.
Yeah, I had a question about what the intent, how that functioned, whether it was required, because the parking setup here is not efficient, right? You are accommodating, and it's unclear to me that if you're being efficiently using the area that you have for the queuing that you were talking about, right? And whether or not some of that extra space, because I'm looking at like lots of cuts, lots of like loading zones, all sorts of complexity here, right? That it would seem to me that you could eliminate or relocate some of the parking and drive lanes that are in the front of the lot, right? And vastly improve both the function, right? This isn't my area of expertise, the simplicity of the routing and the appearance, because what you would see is not from the street, right, which is a big part of the perception that people have that are the pushback that's happening for this project. You wouldn't see a bunch of cars standing still or idling, spewing exhaust, waiting for coffee, whatever, and parking in front of the building. What you'd see is a landscaped area that had some seating, and that would block the majority of those automobile uses. If you want to do this use, which you're allowed to do, right, I think that mitigating the impact of it would be a great design effort for you guys to go through. And you're not working with specific metrics as far as car through, you're just maximizing those things, but you don't have a minimum that you have to maintain here. We're not telling that you need to accommodate 20 cars or 10 cars or 2 cars.
Well, we want the
in your
site to
queue.
work, and I think...
Well, I know you want to do that.
There's a few points I just want to, I think I can, if I may, there's a few points I might address that. Of course, this is an existing building, right? So the prior use, if we went to an old aerial, this was a car use. This was a car dealership. So there were cars with exhaust historically, and throughout the corridor there will always be. But for the benefit of this application, we're trying to encourage the most expedient movements as possible. And again, so too is the product that's being sold at this location. It's intended to be in, out, and out. Dunkin' makes its money by selling more of its product, and it needs to get people through.
I don't care. They're making plenty of money.
But what I'm saying is but making the money is by getting more people through. So they want to get the people through, they want to do it efficiently, they want to do it quickly, and they're one of the fastest at doing it because they've adopted all these systems to make it happen.
Wonderful.
We want the site to work and function efficiently, so the breakout lane is when you got to get to soccer practice, or you got to pick somebody up at school, you need to get out, you already ordered, you're waiting, okay, forget it, I'm gone, and you're getting out. And it's also just an overall, whether you call it Firematic or their access, it just provides that. And also, what we proposed here, where the ordering boards are, where everything is behind the building, right? That's a proposed condition that was proposed by Mr. Clark, too, previously and historically, that any such use would be behind the building. So we've done a lot of these things to encourage and promote those considerations in this design. Sure, it's not regulated that way, but our experience, and our consultants have done a number of these projects, this is the best way to achieve that, and is anticipating comments, for example, from Mr. Worsted, that would come up, and have addressed it, for example, by changing and limiting the delivery location, because I think Mr. Worsted included a cute little note, and I laughed when I saw it, so I don't mean to speak it that way, Mr. Worsted, but it said like, "Let me in," or something, like he put like a little moniker on his traffic plan when he drew it in. But in any event, we do this because we have experience, and our consultants have experience with this specific use and users and how they function and what's best for the overall operations, especially in the mixed-use context of the corridor.
Yeah, best is a broad term, but yeah, okay.
I mean, I would have to follow up with that and say, I think it's worth looking at whether or not the eastern entrance can be aligned with both the drive-through and the escape lane with a pullover for the loading, and then the front of the building, as Kevin was just mentioning, could be vastly improved. And you could add, if we're losing some of the parking spots in front of the building, we can add them to the aisle on to the right-hand side if we don't need to have cars drive through that. I think it's a valid point and worth examining.
So the only thing I'm going to say is relative to the queuing and what I was talking about, if cars are coming in through that lane, if we don't have enough stacking and we have 12 cars, you're going to have cars backed up onto Fishkill Avenue. And that's what you don't want. So that's what we're trying to avoid with this design and with this deliveries-only driveway.
Just to speak to that too, just as the other traffic consultant on the team, I'm saying experientially that when we've had to not go into, when we've done these queuing analysis, to Karen's point, there are ways to move those vehicles that if you were to have a lesser queuing, stacking distance, I should call it, on those peak times, because most of the day, the majority of the day, this is an issue, but we always have to plan for, I call it the Black Friday sale, parking, this is the same truth for the queuing. So in that instance, there are ways that you could achieve that, but it would involve those, like I mentioned, line busting or accommodations on site where you have a pull-up area where they might bring out, if you have something that's not just a coffee and you got egg and cheese, somehow that took more than 30 seconds, then you pull up so you keep the cars moving. So there are ways to achieve what you're all suggesting, so we'll look at that, but we're trying to accommodate it one way, but if there's another way, there are other ways to do this.
Yeah. Did you have something, Natalie?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to add to that, because I just wanted to be careful of the use of like expedient movements, in and out, prioritizing vehicles, like that is at odds with what we're talking about here in terms of mixing uses on this site, having residents live on this site, having pedestrians access this site to potentially get to a rail trail or a greenway trail. So I do see that as a priority for one of the businesses that is going to be on this site. But I think to everyone else's point, this is a mixed-use site, so some of those goals don't necessarily work with the goals of the other uses here.
We're certainly open to it, and again, we're just flagging how the site can operate, but we're hearing your comments in that there may be other ways that, because of the mixed-use experience, that we want to potentially adjust those, and the site fortunately does have some opportunity to try and work those other options or alternatives in,
And you do have 2 extra parking spots, so,
Right.
if we lose the 4 in front of the building, you only need to accommodate 2, actually.
And it isn't efficient, right? You have way over-queued this, in my opinion. You have a lot of queuing space.
Well, why don't we talk about
Which
I think we've heard you on those points. I'm going to bring Chris Raffaelli up just to speak to you about the building changes, because that was another conversation, I think,
Okay.
with some illustrative language at the last meeting. So we'll see where we are now.
Good evening, Chris Raffaelli of Studio Architecture. Appreciate the comments from last time, and we did understand the guidance you were trying to give. So we've converted the building from basically a more composite material building to more brick. We've changed the storefront materials from clear anodized to black. We've added, on the retail end, which is the southern end of the building, we've added some sills under the existing glass. The entry portal to the residential units in the middle, we've changed to a glass enclosure. On the northern end, we've kept some of the trademarking materials from Duncan. Otherwise, the building footprint remains the same. The volume's changed slightly with that stair enclosure. The brick does, can you flip over to the next one? Yeah, so this is the residential and retail corner of the building. These are slightly developed from what was actually submitted. We're continuing to work on this. Not quite finished yet, but based on the guidance that we received last meeting, this is kind of where we ended up. Is there one more? With the, yeah, and so here is the view looking south at the side entrance to Duncan with the pickup window on the left there.
Anybody else want to start? I'm curious, the material that you're proposing for what looks to be a sort of a cornice, I'm just starting there at random. Is that intended to be new at the high, at both buildings, or is it?
Yes.
It is,
Yeah.
okay. And what specifically is the profile there? And the depth, do you know?
From the brick face, first pane is 3 or 4 inches, and then another 3 or 4 inches on top of that.
So it's flat boards?
Yeah, flat board, right.
And what is the total height, do you know?
I do not. The only change in the building height is at that stair tower.
No, the overall height of the cornice.
No, I don't.
Okay,
18
so-
inches or so?
Could we get a little bit more specific next
Yeah,
time
sure.
around on that? Also, I'm curious, why would you, could you consider, do you see how the cornice element here, which is the same as the one here,
Yep.
makes its way,
Flip
you
to
know,
the front.
around the entire building? Is there any way you would think of maybe, articulating it differently in this sort of language as opposed to this language?
Sure, yeah. The cornice we're talking about.
Cornice?
Mhm.
And then I'm curious, when you start thinking about, this isn't just a reclad, because that volume right now for the majority height is all solid construction, right? So
Yes.
you're rebuilding this
Rebuilding
entire
that
thing
tower, yeah,
in what looks like, glass and metal frame.
right.
And why is there a tree in there? I'm just curious.
It's a reflection.
It's,
Glass.
yeah, it's just,
Okay.
it's just a V-ray reflection.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, this element is, kind of there to differentiate the two volumes, the high and the low volume. It's fine. I'm not sure, would this really read this way, where the brick makes its way in, and so, yeah, is that real? Where the brick makes its way into that glass enclosure?
Yes, so that would be continuing the volume of the residential piece.
Yeah.
Would continue through the
And you would
glass there.
continue the cornice in through there? Is that the intent?
I don't think we considered the cornice going
Yeah.
through there.
So again, let's make it look real, the way it's going to look when it's
Yeah,
built.
well, I think what you're seeing a lot there is the reflection of the glass.
No, it's not.
So we can it is, but we can turn down the reflectivity of the material.
I don't think it would reflect that way. But anyway, and also, right, are you intending to make that, whatever that upper surface, as it's making its way along the other side, is that intended to be glass as well?
Are you talking about?
So this piece comes up, it comes up above that roof line.
Yeah,
Is it intended to be glass along the backside?
yes,
It is,
yeah.
okay?
So what you're looking there on your tablet is as submitted, and you see on that rendering, we've lowered the overall height a bit.
Yeah, I need to, if you're showing something new here, we need to see it here, because we can only respond to what we're seeing here. Is this brand new?
Couple days old, yeah.
Oh, well, when are you going to submit that?
Yeah.
2 weeks, but it will reflect further comments from you tonight. So
Okay.
it's an evolution.
All right, so again, I'm focused on what was submitted. I can't respond to that. The other question I have is, right, you actually make a good case for why this might not be great, is this, as this sign comes up and it's really thin, right, it actually allows you to capture a view of the other side of the sign? Does it
Yeah,
make-
not ideal, yep.
Somehow, you need to resolve that.
Yep.
And then, I'm just curious, these expansion joints, is that what they are? In the brick, is that an expansion joint? Is that what are these?
It just reveals, yeah, we're trying to change the plane a bit, haven't resolved it totally yet.
Okay, so a little more understanding of what that definition is meant to be would be helpful. Yeah, it's not, it's sort of, it jumps around on the different views. So if that is a design element, yeah, it'd be good to know ultimately what that's going to end up looking like and where they're actually going to end up landing. And then, yeah, I think obviously a lot of the perception of this building is going to be done in context of the landscaping. Because I think as well, the landscape, especially any kind of proposed landscaping up in this zone, is going to really start to soften things here. So I would really like to see what the whole composition is intended to be and what it will look like at some level of maturity.
Yep.
Any other comments, board?
And a question about what the material, the panels on the Dunkin' Donuts portion, is that like a Trespa panel? Are those metal panels? What are those?
The gray is,
Yeah, the different
is a
gray.
stone.
It's a stone?
Yep.
Is it a cast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, cast panels. And then, so upper and lower?
Yep.
Light and dark?
I think overall the brick is very flat and needs some detailing.
Yeah, I agree.
And the Dunkin' Donuts portion, right? And I don't want to get into this right now, but like, it's really awkward the way that it's like there's, all the planes are the same, but there's just a change in materials and the sign that pops up, right?
Yep.
So if you, and then the awning line goes continuously through, connecting them, as does the cornice, right? So there's two ways I think that you could do this that would make sense if it was me. Is you'd either make that a distinct composition, right, on the corner, because the signage is different, the brick, and have it stand out as like this little or small, it's a small little, like you're saying, it's a small little coffee location, right?
Certainly is.
So that it appears smaller, and the rest of it is the rest of the building is brick, right? So that might contribute to the story you're telling us.
Maybe change the cornice or...
Change the cornice, change the lines that are connecting them, make it distinct. That's one way to do it, right? Is to make it distinct. The other way to do it is to integrate those elements into a bigger composition, but that means that you have to make the other building, you have to make that more like develop the glass tower and the other elements so that there's a more commercial roadside signage vibe about the rest of it that's sort of intertwined, so that it's one composition in this personally, I would make it distinct, right?
I think another thing you would have to do in that regard, Kevin, is move that material change right off of the door frame, because it wouldn't be...
Yeah.
A distinct building wouldn't have its entrance right on its corner.
Right. So if you're, constructing a Disneyland backstory, right, for sort of a contrived thing that you're making, those are bad words, but you know what I'm saying? You're creating a thing that somewhat expresses something, right? That it's, that it was one building, and then this thing was added to it in the 1960s, and it's all bright and cheery and brands, and it's just like the suburbs never declined and whatnot, and so that's one approach, and it might look a little better. Now, there's two reasons why people, I think, object to the whole idea of fast food and strip malls and other things in the city, right? One of them is sort of bougie, right? And it's like, we're classier than that. We have Main Street, we're a classy town here. We do not have ugly, gross, colorful signs like Dunkin' Donuts. And we're not like that. We're classier than that, right? Actually, we aren't. We're not. It's a much more diverse town than that. So that isn't why I would object to it, right? I think that and I guess I'm just sort of broadly making some...
Right, they're like the one that was across the street, the Dunkin'
Well,
Donuts that was there, right.
Right, But we also are a thoughtful, design-oriented community, right? And we have the opportunity to do things that are more considered, that contribute to a better urban experience, right? And I think that we're conscious enough as a community, and we've committed generally, consistently, to things that were environmentally beneficial, right? So if this can contribute to the eventual improvement of the experience of Fishkill, the Fishkill corridor, right? I think it would behoove you to be an example to contribute in that way. And those things have to do with landscaping, traffic, the way the building looks, and also with how it expresses itself, you know? So I think that we could, I think we reserve judgment on this until it's better. Right, John? I wouldn't, I think you guys need to improve it a lot, and I'd like to at some point discuss some of the issues that were brought up by some of these other groups at some
Understood.
point.
Was there a suggestion potentially in any of that?
A suggestion?
Yeah, or a recommendation about what might be included in the facade there or the
Part of what I
signage?
said, yeah, part of what I was talking about before was simplifying the circulation, having landscaping
No, yeah, I'm
in the
speaking
front.
specifically to the building and
To
the
the
Dunkin's-
building,
Yep, and the signage, was there, or the facade, I mean, you were speaking to the specifics, so, and looks of the building, so.
I was speaking to the idea that, like, this is, you know, you could lean into the fast foodness of this, right, of the signage, because you're going to use a Dunkin' sign, right? You already are going to be doing this thing that's a little bit not super tasteful, right? We're not going to make a McDonald's with no signage here. That's what you're proposing, right? And so that should be framed and boxed and put in its little place, right? So that it's an element that stands alone, and that it's in a background of a brick-clad building that was formerly a whatever, right? And that would be one way that it would be expressive and perhaps not as objectionable, that it was conscious rather than accidental.
Understood. And again, importantly, this is an existing building, and it's an adaptive reuse, right? Not a new build, not a new construction, not a tear-down rebuild. It is an adaptive reuse, so it's important. But we hear you, and I think we're continuing to evolve the design of it, and we're just looking for meaningful feedback in that specific regard.
I think if you could simplify the number of facade elements on the eastern, particularly the eastern facade of the Dunkin' bit, that would be helpful.
That's well said, Karen. Did you have anything else, Lynn? Okay.
No, I was just going to reiterate, because Mr. Palmer was asking for specific recommendations. I think I was just going to focus back on what Kevin said about making the Dunkin' look like a separate building, and maybe that's another course of the stone panels to the right of the entrance doorway, so that it doesn't end there, and maybe changing the cornice, doing other things to give it a distinct.
So it's like a sprinkled donut on top of a traditional building.
Yeah, but just the way the brick ends right now, it's abrupt, and it's not really, something's happening, but it isn't capturing it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Good, thanks.
What else?
I think that's it from our presentation for tonight. Ultimately, I think the only other consideration, I think, would be whether or not the board feels that we're getting comfortable towards a public hearing, or if you'd like more information in the plans based on tonight's conversation too.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So first, I just want to...
Oh, sure, sorry, I've skipped your consultants.
You haven't done the round yet. But I wanted to start with, I know Bruce was asked last meeting to weigh in and ultimately opine on the two elements that were of topic last month. And those were this concept of fast food and drive-through. And I know, Bruce, you've rendered and shared a memo as well, rendered your thoughts on the zoning. So if you wouldn't mind just sort of summarizing for us those,
With the zoning for the drive-throughs, I reviewed the zoning code. There's two different zones where drive-throughs are specifically prohibited. One is CMS, the Central Main Street and the other one is Linkage District. Other than that, there's no mention in the code regarding drive-throughs. So at one point in time, Central Main Street wasn't, that was developed not that long ago. So prior to that being in place, drive-throughs apparently were allowed because we do have them on Main Street. So it only specifically prohibited them from that area.
Yep.
So, but there was no other, again, there's no other mention.
So no prohibition in this specific
There's no
zone?
prohibition
Yep.
specifically for GB or a general prohibition throughout the zoning code itself.
Yep, okay.
So that was the one determination for the, that allows the drive-through. The other was for the coffee house. The applicant had submitted to me a sales report for, I believe it was a 9-month window, and the sales for coffee and beverages were just under 60%. I was also given some other information and also did a little searching on the computer as well. Most of the articles that have been written since Dunkin' had rebranded from Dunkin' Donuts to Dunkin', most of the articles had referred that Dunkin' had changed their model and most of their business was now shifted towards beverages as opposed to, I guess at the time was more donuts and then other food products. So again, it fits the definition of a coffee house. The coffee house is, they're selling, more than half of their business as beverages.
Great, thanks, clear.
Quick question. The percentages you're talking about with overall business, I'm not disagreeing with that approach, but are we talking about number of transactions or amount of revenue?
Based upon revenue.
Okay.
Good volume of sales, right?
Yeah, that was the only data they gave me.
You look like you have a question forming.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, what if more than one definition fits a use? How do you decide? Like, I understand and maybe this is just a conversation for offline, but, if the definition for coffee house fits this, but so does restaurant that talks about fast food uses not being included, like, how do you decide, how is it decided which definition is the appropriate categorization if more than one use category?
And just clarify, that's directed to the building inspector, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the building inspector's prerogative. He is the one charged by law with interpreting the code. And, to the extent that there are any, like, ambiguities or vagaries in the zoning code, those ambiguities are by law supposed to be construed in favor of the property owner and against the municipality. So, hopefully that answers your question now.
I had this issue come up as a lawyer at a point not too far in the past, and the bottom line conclusion from my research was that categorizing a use based on the primary source of revenue in the business was being upheld by courts on review. That's not to say another approach potentially couldn't be used, but
That's pretty solid.
throwing it out there.
Yep, okay. Thank you, Bruce. So, yeah, Natalie, want to maybe address some of your review comments?
Yeah, comments 1 through 3 are just kind of cleanup and future action, right? I think there's just a difference between two of the bulk tables. One includes the minimum lot size per unit and one doesn't. And so for residential is a component here. So I just want to make sure that was consistent. And I thought it should be on the site plan, so small correction. Lighting plan and landscaping plan are still forthcoming, and I think that will be important for, again, kind of the conversations we've been talking about softening the architecture and pedestrian safety and things like that on site. Talked about the crosswalk, talked about the residential parking and the access of the residential parking to the building. I think the other comment there is kind of looking at and it's not in the letter, but I just was thinking about it as we were looking at the site plan, is the dead ending of two of the parking aisles kind of dead end. So when you get to the end of those and you don't have a spot, you just kind of have to back up, or just thinking about that, because again, I'm just thinking about car movements and where pedestrians are gonna be walking, and so if somebody pulled into that drive aisle or the parking aisle that's closest to the public plaza, they get to the end and they can't find a spot where all the spots are full, there's no turn, they just would back out, and again, that's gonna be where people are walking across, so just thinking about that movement. I think the changes proposed for the edge of the property in terms of that curb and the landscaping there are extremely supportable in terms of defining. I think we've talked a lot about this on other properties on this corridor of like defining where the boundary is and defining where vehicles will be entering and exiting.
Yep.
And we've reduced that significantly on this site from what was a fully open, essentially a fully open frontage to now these two driveways. So I think that's a really important improvement for this corridor. So very supportable. And then a little note about signage, and again, that's maybe, I think the building inspector kind of reviews that, but I just wasn't sure if the signage was being proposed now, or if that's a separate sign permit, it might be down the road, so, that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Russo?
So as Mr. Bodendorf alluded to earlier, there's a lot of engineering that's still forthcoming. They've been waiting more or less for the board to agree upon the layout of the site. So they still owe utilities, grading, photometrics, and a lot of other information related to the engineering for the site.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ken, are you still with us? Anything else you wanted to add?
Not particularly. They addressed a lot of my comments from their first submission relative to corrections on the traffic study. They addressed several of the site plan comments. There was, I have a kind of a broad comment about the crosswalk, sidewalk, sidewalk bank area. I think there should be some, consideration with, what the committee is going to recommend, and what the city ultimately decides they want to see through there. But I would suggest maybe a broader kind of easement area through there, not just the 5 feet off the property line, but extend that all the way to the travel lane to say this is the area that the applicant would, consider those improvements, whether they be a sidewalk 5 feet immediately off the property line or whether there's some additional separation there. Right now, they're proposing a curb right along the property line and then a potential just pavement area from there all the way up to the travel lane. Typically, if you were building, let's say the city just says, we want a sidewalk on that side of the road with some curbing, that curb would extend all the way out to more the travel lane. So if that whole area is just kind of broad brush, it's to be determined. I'm fine with that, as long as we don't get too far down the road where it's then constructed one way and there's a better idea for how it should be done later.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Any other questions of either the applicant or our consultants around the board?
There's a small... Sorry? There's a walking path for future rail trail. What's the elevation difference between the rail and what's the elevation change? Do we know?
It's significant if you've gone back there.
8 feet or... We'll get you a very specific answer. I know
There
that...
need to be some construction done.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Right now, they haven't provided any of the grading or anything, so we can't.
Okay.
Right, it's not the applicant's property, it's Metro North or whoever will be in the future.
Okay, and it sounded like you were getting ready to ask for us to consider placing public hearing on the calendar. You still got a lot of development, in my view, just relative to, I think some of the things we talked about just in terms of the site arrangement, in terms of the parking, some of the traffic, some of the navigational issues that Natalie just referred to, landscaping, some work still yet to do on the building aesthetic. Hopefully you're taking our comments a way to do some updates there. So it's, I don't know, it's my opinion. Board, what do you think? We can talk about it. It's a little early to schedule public hearing for next month. Any thoughts on the matter?
I agree. I think that there's some significant site plan issues to consider.
I agree as well. If public comments are likely going to concern, among other things, traffic issues that are still a little bit unresolved.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, and that should happen before the...
Yep. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a unique application because it's an adaptive reuse, right? We're adaptively reusing an existing building, so there's some consideration of that. So we appreciate that, and we'll work them into the design, sort of with an eye on hopefully publicly hearing it in 2025.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, Merry holidays.
Merry holidays.
See you.
Same to you.
See you all next year.
That's it for tonight?
I'm going to listen into the next one, but.
Okay. Okay, so that brings us to item number 3 on our regular agenda, that being the review of applications for amended special use permit and amended site plan, hotel and restaurant. You may all remember 1113 Walcott Avenue. Hi.
I guess they missed us.
Hey, good evening.
Yeah. You missed us, huh?
Yeah.
What do we got?
Hold on, I'm just waiting for the graphics here. Okay. Yeah, so this is the property at 1113 Walcott that there's a previous application and approval for a 30-room hotel and an event space. So the applicant wants to amend that approval. The hotel would stay, but instead of the church building being an event space, it would be a restaurant. So there are different hours, different traffic pattern. So the site plan has just minimal changes because the parking is maximized, it's staying the same. We took that back deck off of the church building, which was part of the event space, but isn't necessary for the restaurant use. And also the city parking regulations have changed. So now there would be a minimum of 32 spaces and a maximum of 73 according to the code. We have 33 spaces on site still, and then they're also proposing to use. There's a lot at 21 South Avenue that's the owner controls, and that could be for valet parking on, if there's busier nights or something. So basically the main change is that the use would change to restaurant from event. And the applicant has approached some of the neighbors about this and generally feels that there was more support for the restaurant, so far with the ones that they've talked to. Rich from Colliers did an updated traffic and parking study, based on the restaurant use. So, he can talk about that a little bit, but essentially it's just that change of use.
Okay, that's it.
You want to hear from Rich and then do the comments, or?
Sure.
Well, let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the change to the restaurant use, we took another look at obviously both traffic and parking. So on the traffic end of things, if you recall, we previously had analyzed this for initially a 350-person event, and obviously that got reduced several times. We were down to, I think, 150 people was the max at the end of the day. We took a look at what this project, as now contemplated, would generate versus what we had analyzed previously. When you look at the typical conditions, not event from what we had previously, compared to the restaurant use, this would generate some additional traffic. And it's not significant, but I think in the PM peak hour, it was something like a 20% increase in traffic.
Increase in traffic over what?
Over traffic generated by the site from what was the typical conditions previously to what we're saying this would generate now.
What was the number?
20%.
What are the previous typical conditions?
I can give it to you.
Is that the event space, or is that something else?
Oh, the previous typical conditions was
the church,
was the hotel, and the 50-seat cafe, basically. That was it. That was our typical condition.
Yeah.
Right? The event condition was the hotel and a 100 or 150 person event.
I understand what you're saying now, what you refer to now by previous typical.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. So, again, when we talk, compared to that typical condition, the hotel and the 50 person cafe, we're going to generate some more traffic than what that was anticipated for. When we look at what we're going to generate now with the restaurant and compared to an event condition, it would be lower.
Plus you don't have the, the event condition starts at one time, so everybody has to be
Right,
there
it would be a
at once,
condensed.
and they all depart
Right.
at the same time. This would be more of a steady ebb and flow.
When we go back to our analysis that we did as part of the prior application, and we look at the event condition analysis, we still show that everything kind of worked traffic flow wise outside of the site. So we think that, the additional traffic that we may generate here with this is not going to change really the conclusions from previously. Obviously, the only other thing is that this is now going to be more or less an everyday occurrence, right? Rather than the events being limited to the days that they were previously limited to. So that was on the traffic end. Good.
Yeah, no, I was just, let's talk about that, though. So, okay, it's not going to be an event space. The request is to modify that previous approval to be restaurant use, right? So, how many seat restaurant?
150 seat restaurant.
150 seat. What are the hours of operation intended to be?
7 to 10.
So Sunday through Thursday would be I say 7 to 9, 7 in the morning to 9 at night, but in reality, the morning period is really kind of for
Employee
hotel service, right? And then you would have an afternoon.
Explain that. Are you saying that the restaurant kitchen would be used to serve meals at the hotel?
Correct. Like if you had in-room room service, or maybe there's a coffee or a continental breakfast type situation. I don't know exactly.
So those meals would be taken in the church building, not, I don't understand. So is the church building intended to act as a restaurant with an active kitchen where people are sitting having breakfast in the church building?
Yeah. But for hotel guests.
For
hotel guests.
Yeah, no.
For hotel guests.
That is
not public.
Yeah, that is, because
so that's where I want a little bit of clarity, right?
Yeah.
So hours of operation, that makes sense, meaning there'd be employees and hotel guests cooking and then being served from 7 to what?
I don't know, do we?
Yeah, at what point does it open to the public?
I don't think we've gotten.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the question, is when does this become a restaurant open to others, in addition to hotel guests?
Right. Like 4 p.m.? Yeah, 4 p.m.
4 p.m. to 9 p.m.
To 9 on Sundays through Thursday, and then 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday.
Were they not serving lunch also?
I think maybe Friday and Saturday brunch was a possibility. or weekends, or yeah, sorry,
So
Saturday, Sunday
can we
brunches.
just make sure that we understand that and clarify
So,
exactly, like, because...
I'm gonna just read you the description.
The reason I ask is because it obviously has an impact on what this movement of traffic and, you know, times when this movement of traffic is going to be experienced at the site, right? That's the reason I ask.
Right.
And how
So-
comparable this use is to other uses that are being permitted in the district.
So just going back to, I'm going to read you what was in our letter and what we worked with the applicant to come up with. So, under the modified project proposal, the hotel and restaurant will operate 365 days per year. Dining facilities in the church building will serve brunch and dinner to members of the public, as well as breakfast and snacks for hotel guests to be served in the hotel building next door. I think what we need to clarify there is what the days of the brunch will be, right?
Yeah.
The dining facilities are expected to operate 7 days a week in support of the hotel operations and general public with a maximum capacity of 150 seats. The dining facility will operate Sunday through Thursday, 7 to 9, and Friday, Saturday, 7 to 10. So we didn't get granular on breakfast is this time for these hotel guests, and brunch is at this time on these days, but we can provide that.
Yeah, and again, the reason I ask is so that there's a clear understanding of what the service means relative to, you know, volume, traffic.
Yeah, no, understood.
Yep.
Completely, understood. But I think we can provide that
And so,
for clarity.
It's pretty typical that, and it's just, I'm asking this because it's different. Most restaurants here in Beacon are closed Monday and Tuesday. That won't be the case here?
I think, as of right now, I think the ask is, it's going to be 7 days, but I think that may be a possibility. I'm not going to say for sure.
All right.
Well, we can clarify that as well. But
Yeah, just curious. I understand the desire to, build in every day.
Oh, sure, the reality may be that yeah.
So, yeah, okay. So, okay, continue.
So, the other thing was relative to parking. So, as Arya had mentioned, code now requires 32 minimum spaces, 73 maximum spaces. We have 33 on site. The applicant now controls that basketball court lot over at 21 South Street. There used to be a basketball court. What we did, and the intention is that would be used for valet parking on days of higher usage, so probably Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
When you say the applicant controls it, the applicant owns it, right?
So one of the three of us owns that lot, and that lot has been used by the city for the last year for parking. The city actually striped that lot, which was a basketball court.
Yeah,
It is
no, I
now
get
a
it.
parking lot used by the city.
Yeah, okay.
And so one of the three of us owns that lot.
Right, so what I'm getting at is that at some point in the future, while this is still a restaurant, the ownership may fall out of the partnership to someone else, where that
Yeah.
control doesn't exist anymore. So the ability to find this relief, or at least have this capacity while the restaurant's still a restaurant, could come out of play, right?
It's true, and in preparation of that, we are prepared to enter into a lease agreement with the restaurant, with the project. So we know that that's probably a requirement, and those were some of the things that we were talking about when we were here 2 years ago, where we were looking for other parking solutions.
Yep.
So that's something that it's not me who owns the lot, but one of us would be willing to do.
Yep, no, I understand.
I just don't know, it's possible we may want to consider something more than a lease agreement, like an easement.
What
on
about
the-
when the lease
On the
ends?
property, right?
Yeah.
Because the
An
lease can
easement?
be terminated, the lease can be defaulted upon, but an easement runs with the land.
Makes sense.
Something for discussion.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. 'Cause, yeah, again, it's like, it was the same sort of conundrum we found ourselves in the last time. It's like there's all this, with the 80, what was it? 800-foot radius, available parking business, which, we know on, heavy days, a lot of that parking just might not even be available. So, yeah,
Yeah, now we just have more officially than we had before, which we were already approved for. Just sort of sharing that to the room again.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Well, but to be fair, this is probably a use that increases the parking demand. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it also,
Well-
can I bring up an important point? Is this is an accessory use to the hotel, right? And now the occupancy that you're proposing, right, which had been 150 and was clearly something that would be used as an accessory to the normal functioning of the hotel, now it's something that exceeds, it seems, I mean, what is the balance there? It seems like it is a larger amount of revenue. We were just talking about that as being determinative or significant, and other things than the hotel itself. I just, it seems like there's sort of you're changing fundamentally the approval, right?
Yes,
and
we
you're
are.
asking for a variance, it almost seems, right? Because of the extent of the
No,
use.
no
And I'm not sure if
variance.
that, I know they're not, okay, but is a restaurant allowed?
Yes,
Restaurants allowed?
yes.
Yes,
Okay.
it would be an accessory use to the hotel.
And
Not as accessory, standalone, that's what I'm saying.
standalone.
It's
yeah.
actually, that's actually one of the questions.
Okay,
About
that's
the
why I guess-
application, because in the HDLO district, it contemplates, it allows hotel and hotel accessory uses. It also lists sit-down restaurants to a maximum capacity of 50, and allows the planning board to increase the maximum capacity above 50 in certain circumstances. So one of the questions is, what is the applicant proposing? Is the applicant proposing a restaurant accessory to the hotel, or two separate uses, a sit-down restaurant
Right.
that needs to have the increased capacity
And
by
another
the planning
question
board,
is-
with a separate hotel?
I didn't mean to cut you off,
well,
I'm sorry.
and restaurants are listed as an accessory use, as I recall from the, I don't remember whose memo it was, but someone's memo that I read in preparation for this.
It was
Restaurants-
as a permitted use, restaurant, sit-down restaurants as a permitted use.
The up to 50 is a permitted use,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
on the special use permit as an accessory use, wasn't restaurant use also listed there, or am I remembering that wrong?
It's only listed once, but there is reference to hotel-related accessory uses, which would be a restaurant.
But that's how this was approved, is my point.
It was
It's
approved as an event
originally.
space, being the accessory use to the hotel.
Understood. I mean, I just want to
With
clarify.
with an- also with
What
an
we're
accessory
actually doing,
cafe.
and make sure, because that's a pertinent, that's like a very pertinent thing to determine, right?
Yep.
And it's going to be, I don't think it's clear what the resolution. The other question I had was, and this is about the new parking requirements. Does the parking change in a unintended or maybe intended consequence? Does that allow this project to go through because there's not specific requirements?
So there are specific requirements. When you approved it last time, there actually were there was no parking required
Oh, because of
whatsoever.
the 68, right?
Because of the
Exactly, and that's
1964
gone.
exemption.
64, whatever.
The 1964 exemption has been removed from the code. So there's actually more parking required per code than there was before.
Thank you.
They meet the code requirement, provided, you determine that the 33 spaces with the off-site additions that they're proposing is adequate. But remember, we also have the special permit standard where you need to determine that the parking is adequate. So they fall within the range permitted by the code for the parking that they're providing.
Well, within the range.
Within
but
the range.
The
But ultimately,
the requirement we now
You
set.
set, yeah,
Right.
within that range.
Right, so the range being minimum 32, max
77.
Yep.
73, I think.
73, yeah.
73.
So, and again, available on site, 33?
Correct.
Sorry?
What's the off-site parking number if that basketball court was to be?
So that was what I was getting into next. So in using that basketball court as or now parking lot, as a valet parking lot, we did a layout, which I'm not sure, you don't have that, do you? No, okay. We did a layout that was attached to our letter that showed the layout of how that would be utilized as a valet lot, and we showed 29 parking spaces being accommodated in there.
Because you're parking in the lanes, because it's a valet. Is that what
Yeah,
you're
it's
saying?
not, we're not parking it like any normal person would park in there.
Right,
Like
it's like a
that,
parking
it's,
garage.
it's a valet lot, right? So is the idea. And that we can get more space, more cars in there because it's a valet lot.
So that gets you to, what, 61,
What's 61?
32 and 29?
33
33
and 29.
62 spots.
Right, at the end of the day, what we came up with was that we needed, the max of the demand that we would see from this site would be 90 parking spaces, right? You take the 33 out, you take the 29 out, and we are left over with 28 parking space demand for off-site parking that's not accounted for.
And so what are you doing with those 28?
So that's where the Tompkins lot, the Beekman Street parking, the municipal parking lot here that we were using previously would come into play.
And did I read this correctly, that you did not take any kind of discount to think about folks that would be walking?
Correct,
to
right,
facilities
true.
By residential areas?
Right, so there was no credit in our analysis of the parking for somebody from the nearby housing developments that want to walk here because you're 300 feet away and you don't need a car to get there, and so that wasn't accounted for, which could reduce the overall parking demand.
So, just so I'm clear, the only thing that's changed about this application, meaning when we think about the site plan and all the other things, you know, acoustic mitigation, all of the things that we talked about ad nauseum the last time around, none of those things have changed? The only thing that's changed is the use?
The occupancy.
That's what I mean. The use.
I think that was a John Russo comment, right? You were asking, are any of these elements?
Well, I had pointed out there's a few things that changed. So in RA noted, the back deck is taken off, but also the walking trail that went out to Beacon.
Yeah, that's what I want to get.
From a noise
clear.
reduction perspective,
That's been
you
removed.
asked that question though, right? In
But,
your comment letter.
I also wanted to know if the noise mitigation that was set forth in resolution, that's all going to be applied. The cemetery restoration and maintenance work, was that still going to be employed? Those were the big ones that I had, actually making sure all that.
Yeah, those are all staying in the project. The trail that you were talking about was removed before the previous approval, though.
It was. Yeah.
And the one other thing, just that we had that traffic and parking management plan that we went into a lot of detail on previously. We've obviously updated that for the fact that we have a restaurant use with, you know, not events. But it still kind of is the same document that was there before, and we've even kept the monitoring program that we had talked about that would be done,
Yeah,
6 months
that's- I was
afterwards,
gonna ask
right?
about that.
Yeah, so that's all part of this still. We haven't gotten rid of that. That's, you know.
Yep. And the, yeah, well, I see the deck coming off as a positive, just in terms of, you know, potential impact to noise around neighbors, right? Okay. Do you have, it's just as far as your presentation here tonight, do you have anything else you need to add, or?
No, we just wanted to introduce the,
Yeah.
you know, the amendment and just let you know that everything else is staying in the project. It's really the use to the, you know, restaurant from event.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm, obviously, I did not get to review this project in the former iteration, so I did try and focus my comments just on things that are changing, but did note there was 2 sheets missing from the site plan set, 7 and 16, so they might just not be relevant to the changes, but
Right.
you had a set of 16 everything was a set of 16, but I was missing 7, and
Yeah,
I just didn't know what I should be looking at for those, so.
Right, we'll renumber that
Yeah.
because, one sheet,
Got taken out.
7 is out, yeah.
Okay. And then I did have the comment about the proposed use. So, within the HDL, the Historic District Overlay, you are permitted hotel and hotel-related accessory uses, with some caveats about screening, and you are permitted sit-down restaurants not to exceed a seating capacity of 50. The planning board, the language is specifically in there that the planning board may allow a larger number of seats when it determines that such a larger number is warranted by one or more of the following: building size, building configuration, the nature of the proposed preservation, and/or historic nature and context of the buildings needed for preservation. So I think those are things that maybe the applicant will want to speak to in terms of talking about the restaurant. And then again, I think maybe this will fall to Bruce as a determination, but I was looking at the sections about hotels and what they consider accessory uses to hotels. It talks about dining facilities providing food and drink, but I don't know if that's different than sit-down restaurant. So that would just be something, I think, for the building inspector to review and determine, just so we can clarify the change of use and what's permitted.
What's the distinction?
When we talk about hotels in the code, it specifically lists out what an accessory use to a hotel could be,
Yep.
right? And it talks about dining facilities providing food and drink. I don't know if that's the same as a sit-down restaurant open to the public. That language just sounds a little bit different. I don't know. Newsstands, recreation facilities, spa facilities, conference center facilities, that's all talked about. I'm just not, is it dining just for hotel residents?
Got it.
Or is it, I wasn't part of the original application, so I don't know how that was talked about with the cafe and things like that,
Right.
so.
We changed it to a Dunkin'.
There's an awful lot of restaurants incorporated into hotels that are serving the public.
Again, determination's not mine.
There's some that are not, but.
I think it should just be made clear for the purpose
Yeah,
of this
I
application.
appreciate you
I've seen a
highlighting
lot
that.
of hotels,
Yeah.
Other part was on, I believe Ken and Creighton Manning are reviewing kind of the parking and traffic. So I just had 2 points on that. One is that the new code, the new parking code, while talking about these minimums and maximums, also does encourage the use of kind of comparable analysis of parking demand of similar uses within the context of Beacon. And so as we are speaking about other hotels and restaurants that exist here, if we could talk about the parking demand, or if there's any way to analyze the actual utilization of parking for that, that might help you talking about what the real utilization of this use would be, rather than just relying on ITE standards that are looking at hotel restaurants in suburban settings across the United States, so.
Actually, and I'm sorry to
Carter's is
interrupt, but
gonna
that
be
goes, sorry?
Go ahead, sorry.
Now, it goes to my question, one that I had that I didn't express yet, but I will now. The 93, is that coming from the sort of IT standards, that kind of thing? Yeah, okay. You may do yourself well to do just exactly what Natalie recommended, right?
Yeah, I mean, we would have to find a location that makes sense, that is easily identifiable as far as parking demand, right? That would be difficult to find in Beacon. Yeah, but even the parking there, people are parking on the street to go to the restaurant.
So it could be, you could do yourself a lot of favors by asking folks, where are they parking? How are you getting to this facility? Did you take the train?
Yeah.
Did you walk
Yeah.
here?
Right.
Did you park in municipal parking? All that could help you contextualize the solutions you're presenting for this site, right? And that's specifically something new within the parking section of the code.
No, understood.
So
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out.
I'm not saying we can't do it, yeah,
Yeah.
we would have to
it
find a
does-
location that I think.
It's a little bit
yeah.
more work than pointing to IT standards, but it's
Yeah.
also a little bit more appropriate for the local area.
Yeah, and it kind of, here's my point, right? The IT standards, right, all good and well, but they would, I kind of keep going back to this, like, metrics that are pulled out of a book, yes, or have a basis, right? And they help our jobs, right? But more of the real-world anecdotal, like, data and understanding of, how this stuff actually works, I would at least give this board member a little more, like, comfort, understanding that you may find that the parking, need is actually less in this, in these instances than the ITE standards.
That's
'Cause-
certainly possible, yeah.
Yeah, that was
No.
my point for asking too, because I think the not factoring in folks being able to walk here, I do understand wanting to analyze like
Worst case?
max scenario, but as someone who regularly, when I come to Beacon, takes the train and walks to all the restaurants, it just seems like that doesn't capture the real life scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, the only thing to that was, I know a lot of the discussion we had previously was, and I know you weren't here,
Yeah.
was based on, we did mention that we thought people were gonna take the train and come to, and there was a lot of
Yeah.
negative feeling towards that, so.
I understand. I would disagree with those statements if they were made, but I understand that they were made. The parking management plan, which I think is a key part of this, and like the monitoring, and I think I heard that you said that's gonna be continued. And so this is kind of somewhat addressed through, there's a distinction between event scenarios and typical scenarios. And I think the management plan talks about evaluating event scenarios over the 90 days. So I didn't know if that was changing, like, are we?
Yeah, we can
assume we're
clarify
gonna be analyzing typical scenario over the 90 days.
Yeah, we can
The
clarify
events
that.
Yeah, so just, the valet parking, again, I'll leave that open, and I think I do think that's a viable, and it's approximate, it's next to another parking facility, so I think that does make a lot of sense, especially if the city has striped it and been using that as parking already. Again, mine's just like a technicality of the code that if the parking is actually permitted there, and again, I think that's something for Bruce to review, because it is a resident, it's an R1-7.5 district.
That's rich. If it's actually permitted there or not, after the city's paved it and striped it? Huh?
You know what?
Bruce?
I agree with that.
What?
I agree with
But I
the audacity.
thought I've seen it all.
I do. I tried to note that in my lead-in comment.
Wow.
But, and then I think I had another comment.
There is also a section prior to that about the location, which may come into play because it's like on an adjacent lot, the location of parking. So for the business, the parking should be adjacent to on the property or adjacent to the property.
When you say Jason, you mean contiguous?
Which is requiring a parking.
Oh.
It's something we have to cover like
Excuse me, okay.
I think we already talked about hours of operation. And then points 6 were just corrections to the EAF. And then 7 was just saying that I did look back at the original application and the local waterfront redevelopment program. This does fall within the LWRP boundary in that consistency review. And I didn't see anything there that would change based on the proposed change of use. So I think that based on the information that was already provided, I believe that previous determination would stand and doesn't need to be revisited.
So wait, would this need an amended EAF and secret?
Yeah. So what we've typically done in instances like this is we've recirculated to, confirm that you remain lead agency and done an amended negative declaration.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you, Natalie. Mr. Russo, what do you got?
We went through my comments previously, and Natalie summed up the rest. So,
Perfect.
It was a great job.
Great, okay. Anything from Ken on this yet?
Yep, we took a look at this, noting the proposed changes in the programming for the church, and we kind of acknowledged that the peak, traffic condition is going to decrease over the event style, previous use, but it'll become more consistent,
Yep.
meaning if it's used as a restaurant, the traffic is lower at the peak, but it's happening, on a day-to-day basis rather than on the occasion of when there's, a special event. Parking, I think, will generally be fine, particularly if it's, off-season for the hotel or the restaurant is in full capacity. But when those things are both peaking, then you'll likely have to go over and use the municipal parking lot as, kind of the overflow. And to your point of, ITE, it's a great resource for us, but are there any local examples of, a similar use and I did find one that you guys will know better than me, but it's the Roundhouse, which has, I think, hotel units, but also a restaurant. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, to this one. Maybe in terms of size, it may not be. But that might be an example of a hotel combination restaurant, serving the community that may not have the same parking demands as we would expect, looking through the IT sources.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I was, just based on one of his points, with the restaurant use, you're not going to have, like in the event use, you'd have people coming all at one time and then leaving all at one time. I'm not talking about the numbers, but the way it would flow is a lot different.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I'd see those events as like pulses, like everybody arrives at once and then they all leave at once.
Right.
In this case, it's just a smoother, or I guess more like even flow,
Yeah.
right? That's clear, yeah, okay. Anything else, board? Karen, folks? Sort of spoke my piece. Questions?
Is there a way to get to the public hearing or close to it?
Do the who's or what's now?
Can we start scheduling a public hearing or moving towards that?
Yeah, we gotta do the, thank you. We gotta do the intent to lead, act as lead agency.
Right, yeah.
So I don't think we can do anything around a public hearing until we've done that, right?
Yeah, you can
Be doing that right now?
Yeah, you can
Yeah, yeah.
authorize circulation of your notice of intent to remain lead agency.
Yeah.
Right, so I'll
That
move,
was an FBIF submitted,
Yeah.
right?
So,
I'll move to do that.
yeah, please do. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Motion by David, second by Len. All in favor?
Aye.
And then, public hearing next month?
Well, I mean, the whole parking thing is still open.
Is it, though?
Do we need like an interpretation on that valet lot in a couple of ways?
You
but-
think?
But maybe,
Yeah, it's not
Yes.
a contiguous lot, and they're talking about a hypothetical
Well, you've
license or
been,
easement.
you've been roundly, soundly shot down.
All right, thank you.
Okay. What else?
So basically, for the next submission, we'll clarify some of those items.
Yes, please.
And address the comments, so. Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so that completes our regular agenda and brings us to two architectural review certificates of appropriateness. The first one being 1190 North Avenue facade. Looks like a new paint job. Hi.
My name is Anne Marie Faust of Faust Design Build and Queen City Redevelopment. We are looking for approval for 1190 North Ave, single family, to repaint. In your packet, you had both close-ups and a side-by-side
Yep.
of the existing and the proposed colors. If it would help, we ordered larger, accurate samples of the colors.
Nice. Benjamin Moore Love Affair. That's exciting.
that's a gorgeous house.
I'm just curious, are any of these colors the same as what's currently on the house?
Color for the base house, which is the Love Affair, is very, there's sections of the house that have been touched up. Sections are faded. There's sections on the front porch, sections on the south side that have been repainted recently that are very, very close to this color.
Yeah, it's a I mean, the color palette's beautiful.
We like the red, and it stands out, and it's a lovely house, and actually, I did some scraping, I didn't find another color underneath. I don't know how old it is or original it is. I checked with the Historical Society, they didn't have any images of the house.
Wow.
But you're not going to do the contrast on the fish scales again. It's all going to be one. Or is it
Correct,
to the-
correct. The fish scale will be the same as the clapboard. Yeah.
It's kind of a tradition for the Victorians to have, and especially on that street, to have, color, which used to be a much more popular thing for Victorians, like the San Francisco houses and all that, where...
The painted ladies.
Yeah,
Those are
this is not
those are
like that,
the
but you know what I'm
Maple
saying?
Ultra, though.
Where the
It's-
detail is pulled out with the color.
There's-
It's difficult to paint the fish scales and everything. It's
We
like-
have
but-
a four-color combination. We have the base house. The shutters will be a darker version, right?
Yep.
The accents of the house will be, rather than the green, will be a beige, rather getting away from the red and green Christmas colors.
That's the Balboa Mist.
And then the,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like the original paint scheme, but this new one, I like the introduction of a little bit of contrast. It's kind of nice. It's like, a suit with nice, whatever you call that, like a cuff showing, stuff like that. It's great. It's a beautiful house. Any objections, group?
No objection.
Motion to approve.
Motion.
Motion by Len.
Second.
Second by Karen. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
thank you.
You too. Thanks for
Thank you.
sitting, thanks for
Welcome.
sitting through all that other garbage.
Yeah.
Next item on the agenda must be this gentleman. You are 1 East Main Street facade. What are we doing here? 1 East Main, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the...
It's the was it south-facing wall where they just did all the, like waterproofing and...
Got a lot of questions about that. What
Yes.
happened?
What?
So, the south wall of 1 East Main Street was a thin brick wall.
Right.
It was probably done during the conversion of the development project, and it wasn't done well, I would say. There was, well, just to start,
Right.
I'm a resident of 1 East Main Street. I'm on the board and also an exterior contractor.
Okay.
So trying to help the building, trying
So
to
you
help the
got,
community.
you got voluntold to come here?
Basically,
Yeah.
yes. And to do the work.
Okay, oh, there you go.
Yeah. So the brick didn't have a vapor barrier, didn't have movement joints, had no weep holes.
No
So no flashing.
It was
So
sills, the window sills, right? Or it had sills?
what's that?
Were there window sills? Were the windows...
Windowsills did have like a metal flashing sill.
There was something
But
there.
at every floor line, you would see cracking, right?
Right.
So water was getting in, there was no movement joints at all. So actually kind of went to Bruce early on and said, hey, listen, like, this wall is about to come down, we need to do something. So we got an emergency demo permit to remove it. We hired a structural engineer to do an analysis of the building and come up with a design for a light metal panel system that we can use to basically lighten up the load of the building.
Oh, dear.
And we also just started to look at like we have some renderings. I have them submitted, but
Can I have a
Yeah, sure.
question? Is there a panel that's a larger scale, and like, that's
for sure, yeah.
You want to go larger?
I went with kind of like a 2x4, 2x5 panel intentionally because like we looked at like 7 Creek Drive that had that Corten steel look. That panel's a little smaller. We wanted to bring it a little bigger in scale. But as an exterior contractor, we like to kind of minimize, not go too large format because we don't want to see any oil canning or potential, waviness in the panel. So I think this is a sweet spot. Maybe we can, in the renderings, it looks a little small, but they are roughly like a 2x5 format right now.
2 foot high by 5 foot
Yeah,
wide.
2 foot by 5 foot, 2 by 4 foot, depending on like the sheet utilization that we like to use.
And then the color, is this?
Color, this is charcoal, yeah, we're proposing this because the building itself has a lot of like siding that was painted like a taupe.
Better than that, yeah.
Like a taupe or
Yeah.
dark gray. The rendering seems a bit off.
So it's not going to be that Sierra
It's not
tan.
that sort of flesh
No, the
color?
Sierra tan was just it's hard to
Because I
like
would
show in a
prefer
rendering.
the
We have a
outside
charcoal
bias
rendering
instead
that
of
we
that
could also submit, but it's also hard to like visualize it. But we're
I
looking
think-
for like a charcoal, like a dark
In the
gray.
future, please try to submit what it's going to be, but
Yes.
I'm just curious though, is that going to pull in a lot of heat? You're gonna get some thermal?
So we're gonna put insulation behind,
Yeah.
some Roxol mineral insulation. We
you
will
have-
have, an aluminum Z-girt behind it to kind of help with the thermal break.
Are
So-
you having to comply with New York State Energy?
We don't, but we're adding, the building did not have any insulation on the outside wall. We will put, because I just feel like it needs
helps.
to, it should. Every project I do in New York City,
Performance. It helps in the lifespan.
of course,
It keeps the water, helps keep the water out.
Of course.
especially track,
Yeah,
all
we're-
those things.
we're-
Insulation is
Yeah.
the best money you ever spent.
we're gonna create like a rain screen system now.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just curious, what, I know you probably mentioned it at the beginning here, but just curious, what is the need for this? Why are you doing this?
the brick was falling, the thin brick was falling off the building.
now it's like part
Yeah, so-
black with like a
The
sealant,
thin
right?
brick was
They were
thin
getting-
set applied. There was no air vapor barrier. There was no weep holes. There was no movement joints. So we started seeing. There was mold. We started seeing the thin brick literally like crack on the vertical line between the thin brick and the actual existing brick pier. And at every floor line, you just saw buckling. So
Is it, because this was originally an interior wall?
this was, I think this is when a train had hit the building on
Right.
that side.
Yeah,
and they.
the older part of the building actually had been there up until
Yes.
maybe 2015 or something?
Yeah.
Not the tower
But it
piece,
wasn't
but the
at full
train
height though,
knocked
was
off.
it?
So this is a.
So this was
wood-
an interior wall?
This is a new wood-framed wall, plywood substrate, and thin brick.
Oh, okay.
So I think it was
That's
like,
why.
I think it was like shortened, if I had to guess.
I got it.
I think
And
this wall was shortened.
Originally, there was the oldest industrial building in, I think, Dutchess County
Yeah.
that was torn down in order to
You know,
Right
I know
next to
all
it.
that-
put this
I know
on.
all that history.
Yeah,
I was just,
it's a
I
bit of a
just
shame.
Yeah.
needed to, I'm just,
Yeah,
as an architect, I'm very curious about how materials respond to different elements.
sure,
And this is responding differently because
Yes.
it was never intended
correct,
to be an exterior wall. That's
Correct.
my- Okay, so thank you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Are the
so-
joints actually as prominent as they are?
No, there'll be like a lock seam joint, so I should have brought 2 panels, but you'll see, I don't know, maybe an eighth of an inch, if that's more for expansion and contraction.
Are the vertical joints as prominent as they are?
The vertical joints will look the same. We'll do an end fold here on both ends, so you'll just see like probably a 1/8 joint on every, the perimeter of the panel.
But it's the color, it's like, it's similar, there's like no color differentiation. of the
There is
joint.
no, I mean, if anything, you're gonna see the back of the panel or a shadow line
Right, okay.
of,
So it's gonna-
at the
It's
joint.
going to appear somewhat monolithic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the goal. The goal is to be as monolithic as possible, but have some, either like a standing seam or a lap seam profile.
How far is this going to be from the existing window? Is this going to project? It's a deeper recess.
About, with the 2-inch Z, about 2 1/4, 2.5 inches.
How are you,
We'll do trim work. We'll do like a J trim around the heads and jambs. We could keep that profile, minor, maybe like an inch reveal around. And then we'll do a sill, like a sill flashing. That'll come up and over.
and I have to, I mean, the one thing I think it's practical and it looks better to have a sill that actually is proud, right, as a drip.
Oh, yes, yeah. So we'll have a drip edge.
And also it should have visual depth, right?
Yeah.
So, because you can do this so that it looks invisible, I don't think you should try to make it disappear. I think you should try to make it because what people are going to freak out when you do this, honestly, because I've had 3 architects talk to me about what a travesty, whatever, the whole Michigas. You know more about it than I do.
Sure.
But because it's so prominent on Main Street, right?
What's the sheathing material?
This
over
is
the studs?
aluminum. This
No, I
is-
mean, no, right now.
Oh, plywood, and
So
I
you-
put an air vapor barrier. Yeah, it's a fluid applied permeable air vapor barrier.
That's what's on there now?
Yes.
Over
Okay.
plywood.
With
Okay.
liquid,
A liquid membrane.
liquid
Yeah,
membrane.
and it's, I would say UV stable, so it could stay on the building, but ideally,
Right.
the more we leave it exposed, the more potential issues we've had, that we can have.
What would realistic alternatives be to the aluminum panels?
Our structural engineer has basically said that because it was built as an exterior wall, but because we noticed this buckling on the thin brick, that they are looking for something lightweight, and other than metal, like they wouldn't suggest going back with like a thin brick system. They think the building could potentially, it could have the same problems down the road.
Yeah, no, this-
So I would say metal is probably
This is the right
the best option. Aluminum is the best option, and I think it kind of ties in with some of the standing seam roofs that you see on the retail spaces.
What you're not going to see is.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah, yeah,
This is a certificate of appropriateness, so what are the alternatives? It's kind of a
Yeah,
pertinent
it's tough to
question.
say. Like a siding maybe, but I think there's I think enough siding on the building currently with like the terraces and the bulkheads.
No, and this gives it a certain industrial look.
Correct.
That I think kind of fits.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
Jesus, it's a shame, though. I really do think it's a shame, because it's gonna, you have to admit, it's a totally different era, right?
Yeah.
So when you're putting like old and new together, right? Like what you're not showing, you're showing the worst view, which is that intersection where this wall comes up above tracks.
Yeah,
Like for
yeah.
several floors.
Yeah.
So that intersection can be dealt with in a number of ways. Some, like almost most of which sort of look awkward and draw attention to the fact that you're adding this thing as a Band-Aid or a patch, right?
Yeah.
But if you trim it, or if you're conscious about the way that edge condition works, right?
Sure.
And you've seen this, you do this all the time,
Of course, yeah.
right?
Some kind of reveal, you're saying.
You can
between-
make a reveal, you can do
Yeah.
a number of things where it's not like two things jutting up
Sure.
against each other.
Sure.
It's like, that, you thought about that for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna suggest that we look, that you resolve that and present that to us rather than approving this now. I know you wanna get this done.
Sure.
And we can maybe look at the material, but I really think that I wanna see that get resolved.
Sure.
Because if it's not done, if it's done with a piece of bent metal and overlapped,
Yeah.
it's gonna be it's gonna be an expensive mistake.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's worth your while to do that, and you've done this, right?
Sure,
You've had
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have
documents, I'm
in-house
sure.
drafters. We can do these details quickly and
Right,
and
right.
show
You're
you.
pro, you know how to do this, you can get this done.
Yes.
I'm just saying, and the unfortunate thing is the meetings aren't like, it's not next week or anything.
Of course,
You know?
And you're referring more to like the column at the brick column at tracks, the relationship to that?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a brick facade, and
Yes.
this is this new thing coming out,
Yeah.
right?
There's also like that column is an existing column that turns in on the south wall.
It
right?
does,
Like,
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's the other reason.
We would
why I wanna show
leave
the
that,
video.
obviously, because that's the actual existing brick. The thin
Yeah.
brick before it went past it, like it literally covered the
Right.
old brick.
No,
here.
it was bad. and,
Yeah, so we would like to keep that, obviously, that brick pier on the corner.
Right.
And then the relationship of this to that, it would be recessed. So
Okay.
it would be prominent. That corner would be, proud of.
I just think you really need to show it
Sure.
to us, and.
What's your timing? When do you want to get this up?
I mean, we're eager with the weather now. We're trying to take advantage of decent weather that we've had. We want to start as soon as possible. I mean, I'm going to fabricate this myself. We want to be starting in the next couple of weeks if we can.
You got a car?
You're breaking all these pieces yourself?
What's that?
You're breaking all these pieces?
Yeah, yeah, we're doing everything ourselves. I have a fabrication shop.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You ever talk to the guy who did Creek Drive?
About
his-
I mean, I saw
the way
everything.
he did that work.
I saw everything come down on that building, so we won't be doing that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I took
you mentioned
the aesthetics of it, and I figured let me bring that to the table. But
We're just approving the aesthetics.
Yeah.
No, I know,
We're not
but the
approving the
aesthetics of
detailing.
the detail on the corner.
I will tell you.
More than just the selection of the material.
Yeah, and maybe we could look at a photo, but that brick pier, the existing brick pier of the building, is like proud of where this facade would be. So they wouldn't be in the same plane.
So let me ask you something. How much of this type of stuff have you installed in your career?
The last 15 years, I've cladded over 3 million square feet in New York City.
And you are a part owner of this building?
I am, I live in the building the last 3 years.
Right.
And I'm on the board to try to help
Right.
this work get through.
I'm going to say right now that I trust my fellow citizen to do the right job. So I'm going to make a motion.
This corner.
Which he said it was previously covered.
So we can get out of here. I'm going to make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Karen. I'm going to actually make the motion myself, Mercedes. Motion by John, second by Karen. All in favor?
Aye.
No.
Aye. Nay? Do we have an aye? Okay. Len?
I said nay.
I'm going to say aye.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And I definitely, trust me, I live in the building. I want it to look
Understood.
amazing.
You know why I was being
No,
Okay.
the last thing I want to see is a flat wall and not have any,
There's an architect I get the bus with, who literally, every time
All
I
right,
talk.
motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Not until I hear this anecdote, damn it.
Then you can keep the conversation going, but,
Okay.
motion by Karen,
Seconded.
second by Len, all in favor?
No, I want to hear the anecdote.
We're all in favor, thank you, Mercedes. So,
Thank you all.
please continue, thank you.
I appreciate it. Nice meeting you all. Thank you.